Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And yeah, good afternoon. 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Welcome to the home of common sense. This is Talk. Lots to get through. Keir Starmer, of course, will warn Donald Trump at a meeting at the White House today that Vladimir Putin will invade Ukraine again unless the US provides protection for a European peacekeeping force. Good luck with that, Keir. We'll get more detail in just a moment. Also this afternoon, as you've been hearing, asylum claims in the UK reached a record high of 108,000 last year, with 1/3 of applicants arriving across the Channel in those small boats. But don't worry, because Keir's got a plan, hasn't he? He's going to smash the gangs. And police in London have been told to be less aggressive when carrying out stop and search. By the spoiler alert, they're not aggressive as it stands, as the Met Police relaunches its policy for seizing weapons and drugs. They did thousands of weapons seized last year, about 17,000 or something over the last few years. Extraordinary success rate, but for others, it ain't good enough because they don't like the idea in the first place. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Here's the thing. What do we need Keir Starmer to get from Donald Trump? What do we need Keir Starmer to get from Donald Trump? It's a big day for young Keir. Off to Washington. This is like the mother of all school trips for the North London youngster. He's going to see the president. It's a meet and greet in the Oval Office. It's like he's won a local radio competition. He's going to press the flesh, have a couple of photos and then kicked out before Andrew Tate's ushered in for a slap-up lunch or something of that order. Let's maybe, though, give some proper focus to this. This is genuinely a big meeting, one of the biggest given on the political landscape in the current situation, the current state of planet Earth, etc. Mr. Starmer needs some assurances. He's got to come away with this with something. He absolutely has to. And of course, Ukraine, we know, is key to everything here. Will President Trump promise some protection for the Zelensky years, for years to come under the Zelensky regime, or whoever the next president happens to be over there? Trump says it's up to Europe to provide security guarantees for Ukraine, and he's kind of partly right. I mean, the idea that we're talking about Russia, one of the greatest military powers on planet Earth, run by a dodgy, murderous plutocrat. The idea it's got nothing to do with the United States is just an absolute nonsense, but it plays well to the Trump gallery. So, yeah, that's his line, really. It's up to Europe to provide security guarantees for Ukraine, and there will be no assurances of Washington's involvement. Starmer, of course, will try again. He's going to try and give this another go. He'll try and impress the president with his announcement this week that he's going to increase defence spending. Hey, Donald, he's going to say, I put some more money in like you told me to, delivered in some kind of soppy tone in the I only wanted to pet the rabbit, George, kind of way. This will cut little ice. I was listening to Lord Simon MacDonald this morning, the UK's former head of the diplomatic service, and he said, and I quote, "There is no way that will satisfy the president." And believe me, Simon MacDonald knows his beans. So there is a mountain to climb here. Will Donald Trump play the diplomatic game and give something to Keir in order that Keir Starmer can leave the White House waving his paper of victory, saying, yep, we got Gary, America are with us all the way? Is that likely to happen? Aside from Ukraine, this is, the biggest story right now, geopolitically speaking. There are other stories out there. There are other elements and things that we need, maybe from the United States. What do we need Keir Starmer to get from Donald Trump? What questions should he be asking him? 0344 499 1000. What sort of area are we talking? I mean, primarily, I suppose, trade would be the big thing. Right, Mr. Trump, don't put any tariffs on anything that affects the UK. He's already lobbed a load onto Europe. Don't do anything like that. And, can we have a trade deal that's going to be advantageous to both of us? I would assume that's what it's going to be. in some respect. They, of course, have their public-facing meeting and their announcements and answering questions, and then there is a sort of private dinner. Is that where the real work is done, or is that already done behind the scenes by the head honchos in the civil service and the Prime Minister's office, etc.? 0344 499 1000. What do we need Keir Starmer to get from Donald Trump? It's an interesting meeting, but then, you know, Macron managed it, didn't come out. Well, he had the unfortunate photo op sitting there as the intern at the side of Donald Trump's massive desk in the Oval Office. I think Starmer's going to try and avoid one of those old bear traps, not falling for the desk roost, Mr. President. But maybe Donald will give it a go. Who knows? But we do need a result. We need something to come out of this. And Keir Starmer does as well. And for all of the criticisms and everything that we would throw Mr. Starmer on any other day of the week, he's our Prime Minister. I don't want to see our PM belittled, as Julia said, and I would like him to come out with something we can say, well, OK, yeah, fair play, mate. You know, you're not my cup of tea, you're not my flavour of politics, but you've got something out of this meeting. Thoughts on that? 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Let's get a word on this. And for the other big stories of the day, Henry Hill is with us, Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. Afternoon to you, Henry. I mean, we can't really overstate the importance of this meeting. It's often been described as the most important prime ministerial meets president meeting since the end of the last war.
Yeah, potentially. I imagine we might also include all of those ones where Harold Wilson managed to avoid getting pressured into deploying British troops in Vietnam, but it's definitely up on that level. The traditional sort of post-war, certainly post-Suez conception of Britain's place in the world is as a bridge between Europe and the United States. I think we have got the special relationship, which I think is slightly overstated, but nonetheless is based on some kind of reality normally. Yeah. And then obviously we're in the European continent as well. And now you're in a very, very strange position where Donald Trump is in very, very short order, completely ripping up the foundations of that historical arrangement. He's deeply skeptical of NATO. He resents European countries freelancing. He clearly doesn't see a particular interest in America that America has in Ukraine. And Starmer is trying to keep that show on the road because, of course, like all British politicians, Starmer has talked a very big game on Ukraine, and Britain has given quite a lot to Ukraine. But you'll notice that there's a real split in Europe. Yeah. Starmer, who doesn't have the troops, is desperate to deploy troops to Ukraine, absolutely determined he'll do it as long as all of the other countries do it so that he can do it. But the countries that have enough soldiers, we're talking about Poland and so on, they're categorical that they're not going to deploy troops to Ukraine. So Starmer's basically trying to keep the illusion of European strength, which relied entirely on American strength, going. Yeah.
Why would, just on that point, I keep seeing this headline as well, why would Poland be so hesitant to assist? It's literally its neighbour.
Well, because I imagine the concept of a war with Russia is much more real in Poland than it is in Britain. Yeah. You know, if you think about it, to be honest, even horrifying as the concept of a hot war with Russia is, and I think a lot of people in Britain haven't processed how bad that would actually be, even just in terms of like military body count. We're far away, right? It would be like most of British wars, it would be a war that we were fighting on television somewhere over there. Yeah. For Poland, the risk of Russia doing, of a land invasion by Russia is historically and militarily just much, much more real. And so they are understandably more cautious.
Let's have a little listen then to one element of that visit, and that is the ambassador over there in the United States. He is Lord Manderson. He appeared in good spirits a little earlier, cracking some jokes, or at least trying to, at his host's expense. Let's have a listen.
Already I can feel there's a real buzz around Washington right now. You can sense that there's a new leader in town, that he's a true one-off, a pioneer in business and in politics. Many people love him. Others love to hate him. But to us, he's just Peter.
There it is. Sorry, Keir Starmer on Peter Mandelson, I should have said. To us, it's just Peter. I don't know why that's a particularly funny line. Is there a reason for that, Henry? Have I missed something?
I mean, in the context of dinner speeches, which were grading on a curve. But the whole tee up was he might have been talking about Donald Trump, and then he was talking about Peter Mandelson, and frankly, I think that the choice of Peter Mandelson was a slightly baffling one to be ambassador to the United States at this point.
Yes.
I have to think of somebody who might be able to meet the Trump administration halfway. Peter Mandelson wouldn't necessarily be my first choice, and so, but ultimately, you crack jokes at the expense of your team to ingratiate yourselves with the other team, and that's what the prime minister. Well, that's what the prime minister is doing. Because the punchline of that joke is, Donald Trump might fit this description, but Peter Mandelson doesn't really, does he?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the live at the Apollo gig might not be forthcoming anytime soon. But I get it. Listen, that is political humour at its most mediocre, perhaps. Let's move to this story. The Home Office have released the official immigration figures for the year ending 2024. They do make for some pretty grim reading. This is despite Keir Starmer's big plans. And if you're not aware of what those big plans are, have a listen to this.
Only way to stop that is to smash the gangs that are running this vile trade, is to smash the criminal gangs, and they are criminal gangs, that are running this vile trade and putting people in the boats, take those gangs down. But I think smashing the gangs, I think have to smash those gangs. The only way to stop that is to smash the gangs that are running this vile trade. To smash the gangs, have to smash.
Well, he hasn't smashed very much because the numbers of people coming over and claiming asylum are through the roof, Henry.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like every second time I do this show, something on this has happened, and then we get that glorious clip of all of the prime minister's the prime minister's policy is nonsense, right? Like we've said it to you before, smashing the gangs doesn't work for a very simple reason. People are prepared to pay a lot of money in cash to get smuggled into this country, and rubber dinghies are cheap. Right?
Yeah.
So as long as that basic economics exists, there will always be people who are prepared to step into the gap and exploit people and engage in people smuggling. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, smash the gangs if you can. Yeah. Absolutely.
Smash those gangs. Smash away.
You could be much more muscular. As far as I'm concerned, you could be much more muscular than we're already being. With the IRA, occasionally you'd wake up and find we'd shot 6 of them in Gibraltar. That might stop people smuggling. But ultimately, the reason that people come here is because we have a very lax legal system. Médecins Sans Frontières actually incredibly put out a comic series on Twitter. I don't know if you saw it, which was basically from the perspective of an illegal migrant saying, I don't want to stay in Europe. We don't have any rights. I'm determined to come to Britain.
Yes.
And because we don't have a contributory welfare system, so therefore if you can get in and eventually get an amnesty, which is the way that government clears the backlog about once every 10 years, you can get straight on the social housing queue. And because we don't have ID cards or anything like that, we don't police our black economy. Indeed. And so you can get a job as a delivery rider or whatever it is. That's what you need to do. If you want to deal with it, you need deportation mechanisms and you need to crack down on black economy working. And the Prime Minister is doing neither.
18% increase from 2023 in terms of asylum claims, almost doubled as well since 2021. And we've got 91,000 cases awaiting a decision at the tail end of last year. Some of this comes under the last Conservative government, but, the big old chunk of it is under the new government. And they had the opportunity, right, to come in with a new broom and start afresh, and they flunked it at the first hurdle, it seems.
I mean, honestly, I can see why, because what politicians are dancing around, but we're not yet in a position to accept, is that the post-war international legal order for refugees is simply unsustainable. It was very, very optimistic and idealistic, but it was drawn up in the late 1940s, and the image they had in mind was things like the Kindertransport, right? Yep. It was a relatively small number of a particular minority who were facing what turned out to be the most satanic persecution in the 20th century. Now it's got to the point where the number of people who would technically qualify for asylum in the world runs to the tens of millions, if not more. And crucially, if they get here, you can't actually, there's no mechanism in the current law for saying, okay, you probably would qualify for asylum, but we're full, right? That's why we end up making, the British means of trying to control numbers is making them swim the channel, right? But Starmer, of all people, was never going to admit that. So ultimately, we just have to accept, if we're going to stop this, that there are millions of people, tens of millions more, who are in terrible situations in countries around the world, but those countries are just where they're from.
Yes.
And they do not have the right to come and live in another country.
And the one thing, indeed, and the one thing that doesn't really get acknowledged, I mean, people can be quite aggressive in the way they say, these are spongers, these are, even if they're people that just want to change their life, say, so they have every intention of working. We have to surely acknowledge that at this stage in the 21st century, Henry, people are well aware of the fact you can move around. It would have been unthinkable a decade and a half ago that if you lived in Eritrea, that you could jump on a boat and set up a new life in the UK or France or Germany. It's not unthinkable anymore. We have the internet, we have all manner of information, social media, etc. That has to be acknowledged in this story, because we seem to be in this curious position where, you're either genuine or you're not genuine. And actually, I think there's a third factor in this. People who may not be genuine in the sense that they are escaping a tyrannical regime, genuine in the sense they want to work. But we must surely open our eyes and realise that people move around now, and they want to move around now, and that's always going to be, I would argue, a big contingent of people movement across not just Europe and this country, across the world.
Yeah, and that's why, as I said, I think we need to shift towards a system where more people are just, I'm sorry your country is terrible, but that is just the country you live in. You can have exceptional cases, but you need to be prepared to treat them as exceptional cases, rather than being like, well, if I'll do this for one person, I have to do it for every single person. But it also means things like reimagining how we do welfare, citizenship. In Britain, Britain is a country where if you get here on a visa, it is relatively straightforward, albeit maybe slightly expensive, for you to end up with permanent residency and citizenship in 7 years, right? There's nothing gatekeeping you there apart from the Home Office fees. That's something that we might need to change. We can say, fine, if we're going to have economic migration, you can come here and you can be part of the British economy, but you are on a conditional visa, which you can renew, but which you have to renew and is always conditional. And when you've earned your bread, you go home, right? You don't. There's a difference between coming here to work and being British. But also on the working point, because this is one of the ways in which it's a bit like a sort of shell game, with pro-immigration arguments. You have to play find a lady, because when we talk about legal immigration, we're constantly saying we don't want low-skilled immigration, right? We want a selective system that's based on real shortages in high-value areas of the economy. But then whenever we get lots of illegal migrants in, or dependents of legal migrants, another thing that we don't talk about enough, and people say, oh, well, they work. And it's like, yeah, but they're doing unskilled work, right? A lot of the time. Yeah. So that's just mass unskilled immigration. So we do need to join these dots up much more than we have so far.
Indeed. Henry, stay with us. Lots more still to come. We will talk stop and search back on the agenda as well. And more than 500,000 benefit claimants who are out of work because they are sick have never actually had a job. We'll look at that story too. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. And that question we threw out at the beginning. What do we need Keir Starmer to get from Donald Trump? What do you want your Prime Minister to achieve in Washington? Thoughts on that as well. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Gary Lineker has just criticised the BBC for pulling its controversial Gaza documentary. The departing Match of the Day presenter was among 500 TV industry figures to sign a letter accusing the corporation of bowing to censorship and racism. This is a surprise. The letter, whose signatories included, of course, Miriam Margolis, the actress, Anita Rani, the Countryfile presenter, as well as 9 BBC staff,
David
argued that
Tennant,
the film
Hugh Grant,
was
Emma
an
Thompson.
essential piece of journalism.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Somebody called Fox's fan says, I really hope Trump tears Keir a new one. He deserves big time, and sends him packing with his tail between his legs, says Simon. I do find that, I don't know whether that is that a left-wing view? Is that a right? I don't know. I don't want to see my Prime Minister of whatever, could be a flipping Lib Dem or a Green Party Prime Minister, I couldn't care. I don't want to see another leader rip apart my leader when it comes to no more than I would want to see England get beaten because I didn't like the manager very much, or I liked the manager of the other side. I mean, that's just a really weird position. It's certainly not a patriotic one. It's probably, you know, I don't know what part, I'm trying to work out what part of the spectrum that comes from. But I'm not isolating Simon, who sent this in, particularly, because I'm seeing that said a lot on, you know, I hope he tears him apart. It's like, why? Why would, surely you want him to come back with an amazing deal. Wouldn't that be the best result of a meeting? Not that I think that's ever going to get discussed, but you take the point. We've got Henry Hill with us, Deputy Editor at Conservative Home, looking through the big stories of the day. And this one, Henry, more than 500,000 people claiming benefits for health reasons have never had a job, according to new analysis. Let's have a listen to that clip from Fraser Nelson's documentary. He did this for Channel 4 on Britain's benefit scandal, featuring the man who explains how he earns more money by not working.
So you're working part-time now and you're getting long-term sickness benefits. So what's the combination of those two compared to when you were working full-time with no benefits?
It's no different. So I'm probably working half the hours for the same money.
Right. So there's no financial incentive for you to get out of a situation at all?
None at all. None at all.
So why are you here? Why are you talking to me?
Because I want to highlight how bad things are.
Now, here's the thing, Henry, and it's interesting when we see clips like that. We spoke to Fraser at the time when that documentary came out, and there were lots of kind of similar stories. Look, if somebody is ill, I'll be the first to say, that's precisely why I want to pay into a system to help people who aren't very well. I'm proud to have a good system. 500,000 people who've never gone to work. I mean, does that figure surprise you?
I don't know if I'd have given you that exact number, but no, not especially. And as you say, we always do need to be careful when discussing this subject, because there are people who are genuinely long-term sick and can't work. And we live in a society where I pay my taxes to support them, and I'm absolutely fine with that. But it is a fundamental sort of inescapable challenge with any welfare system that it does this. James Bartholomew did an amazing book, I don't know if you've read it, called The Welfare State We're In, a couple of decades ago, where he described the psychological impact of the receipt of welfare. And this was a history of basically how the welfare state came into existence. And it does, once you start receiving money like that, it does act as for most people, a disincentive to work, right? Inevitably, because it would probably be the same for me. If I was able to spend a couple of years matching my current salary on some kind of government benefit, what would the incentive for me to go back to work be? Once you're in work has a lot of psychological benefits, and it's generally good for people. But the question also is, where do you draw the line, right? Because the fact is, we spend vast amounts on all of this now, unsustainable amounts. The British entitlement spending, if you include pension, social care, welfare, NHS, is on track to become financially unsupportable by our current tax base by the end of the 2030s. Sure. And so you need to make it more restrictive. But how do you do that? Now, one of the big problems, I think, is that there's no local finite fund, right? It used to be, the way that we traditionally did welfare a long time ago, is that it was done on kind of parish or council basis, and they had a pot of money, and they knew everyone claiming it personally. There was a finite amount of money in that pot, and they could inspect them regularly. Now, What we have instead is a sort of inexhaustible, national pot of money, and individual welfare officers. They just make decisions not based on can we afford this. That literally that thought never occurs to anyone in a job centre or in any other government bureaucracy, because it's not their job. Their job is never can we afford this. It's simply what do I think this person needs or deserves, and then all of that gets added up and sent to the Treasury. Now, I think that is an unsustainable way to do welfare. And frankly, what we probably are going to have to do at some point is we are going to have to fundamentally shift towards a system where there is simply a pot of cash for a given type of benefit. And then we are much more rigorous about how we spend that money. And that will mean cutting welfare benefit.
What I often hear, speaking to ministers and former ministers in particular, who are often the best people to find out, how this thing works, is that governments find it oddly much easier, sometimes cheaper, but certainly much easier. I find it staggering it would be cheaper to give the green light rather than the red light to a claimant. The headache that's involved in the only thing worse than somebody with a benefit check who doesn't really deserve it is that same person without a benefit check. That causes all sorts of other issues, and ultimately we end up picking up the bill. Do you think there's something in that?
Yeah, but again, that's a choice, right? It's the fact that it's the fact that they can appeal and they can take the government to court. Yeah. And again, the way that we have currently legally structured entitlement spending, including welfare, is that there's not that finite pot. It's simply a list of legal criteria. Do you meet them? If you meet them, you get the cash. And the place you can see where this is the devastating effects of this, is local councils, right? Because they're responsible not for actual welfare, but they're responsible for some things like social care, special educational needs. I don't know if you've seen taxis for school children, right? Yeah. This is a nice thing that was drawn up in some legislation decades ago, and over the last 10 years has run completely out of control, because councils have no way of refusing. If somebody meets the legal criteria, they can get a taxi to school at huge public expense, and if they don't get it, they can take the council to court. This is a structural problem with welfare, and whilst whenever you crack down on welfare, you always do need to be careful that you don't punish deserving people who do deserve it. We do, I think, have to have quite a difficult conversation about how much economic inactivity we're actually prepared to pay for.
And just a final word, actor Gene Hackman has died, the star of the silver screen, known for his appearances in classics like Superman, The French Connection, Bonnie and Clyde, and of course that horrendous character in Mississippi Burning. Found dead with his wife Betsy in New Mexico. Here's a speech of him taken back in the day. This was a Golden Globes speech of him, taken aback by how long his career has gone on for.
I was thinking about the clips that they chose. Actors being who they are, we'd always like something a little different or a little different payoff or whatever. But generally speaking, it was all terrific. I was very surprised that they showed a clip from Runaway Jury, which I just finished Wednesday night. So that was kind of nice.
He was an incredible actor. It appears, and very sad, that both he, his wife, I think, and his dog were all found dead in this house in New Mexico. He was 95 years old. Who knows what has happened, but the police seem to think there's no foul circumstance or foul play, as they say. We can maybe draw our own conclusions, and we'll find out in good time. But a real great of the silver screen gone, Henry.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously a horrifying story. When you read about that, it's the kind of thing you sort of think is, I suppose, gas leak. You don't want to speculate, but they're saying currently, and who would want to do anything terrible to him? But it's odd when they go. I mean, the Gene Hackman's career is one of those ones that I mostly know of from watching old films, because I think Runaway Jury, the one he mentioned near the end, one of his last films, is one of the only ones that was really contemporaneous with me when I was growing up watching films. But nonetheless, it's just one of those presences where sometimes you don't even, because I was growing up, you don't recognize just how much they're in. They're kind of just a background character. It's like, oh yeah, is that he looks familiar? Who's that? Oh right.
Yeah, that's him from yes.
Right, that's him from that, and now he's in that, and now he's in that. Behind Enemy Lines. He was in Ants, I think, hilariously. Wow. He voiced acted in Ants. But it's always a shame when it's always a real tragedy when they go, and just the question that prompts for me is, who's my version of him, right? One day, which actor of my generation is going to be there, having had a career that ran for God knows how many decades, and was it just in so much? Yeah,
well, it's interesting because it depends on your, Gene Hackman, as big as he won 2 Oscars, a load of BAFTAs, the Golden Globes, Actors Screen. I mean, man alive, this guy really did clean up in that respect, and the size of the films that he was in. But there's still quite a lot of people today that aren't quite, a few people in the office go, I'm not sure I know who he is. I guess, fast forward 30 years, there'll be people going, Tom Cruise? No, I'm sorry, I don't really recognise that name. I guess that's just the evolution of time, I guess, and certain generations.
I suppose so, although Tom Cruise, of course, doesn't age. So as far as I can tell,
he's only 17, as it turns out. So maybe the wrong.
Every time, you see him in Top Gun Maverick or something, and then you look at his actual age, and you're just like, well, I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. Hollywood just really does manage to. He's like Paul Rudd. Some of them in Hollywood now really do just have the immortality gene. But it is an interesting question. Who will be, when I'm an old man, who will I be going, oh, but it's this person? Yeah. And my grandchildren or grandnephews will be looking at me as if I've just mentioned someone off Turner Classic Movies or something.
I'm genuinely fascinated by those. We talk about it a lot with politics in the office, and I remember my nan talking about politicians, thinking, how do you know the names of these people? Well, that's just like us talking about who's around now, and in recent years. But I guess, and similarly with films, either way, whatever way we slice it, Gene Hackman was a great of cinema, and he's died today, age 95. Henry, thank you to you. Henry Hill, Deputy Editor over there at Politics Home. Thank you to him. 0344 499 1000. Comments on any of those stories, particularly the immigration story as well. We've got it. We know it's been out of control. And just if you want the sort of salient headline on immigration, the UK received the 5th largest number of asylum seekers in the EU plus in the year ending September 2024. Now, if you consider how many countries are in the EU, I know there's some smaller countries. There's quite a lot that are much larger as well. That tells you quite a lot. Thoughts on that too. And Keir Starmer goes to Washington. What do we need Keir Starmer to get from Donald Trump? Is it just about Ukraine, or is there something else in there that you think the Prime Minister should be discussing with the President? We're going to talk in a few moments too. Sir Anthony Seldon, Downing Street historian and author, a man who knows his way around a political story, always a good voice to discuss these kind of things. When the PM met the President. Details coming next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Margaret in Birmingham says, I hope Keir Starmer does come away with advice from Donald Trump, cancel the Chagos plan. I think you're right. He looks like someone who's won a competition. But I also think he looks like he's just been made the head prefect. Well, he kind of is the head prefect, and whether you are a Labour voter or not, he is still our head. He's our Prime Minister, and you hope your Prime Minister, regardless of your political persuasions, comes back with the booty. You want them to return with positive news, something good, whether it's on Ukraine, trade, Chagos, whatever it happens to be. Ukraine has been described as the Prime Minister's #1 priority as he heads over there to meet Donald Trump. This afternoon they will meet, 7 o'clock this evening. There'll be a press conference. In between time, they'll have a little powwow, as they do in the Oval Office. Starmer is calling for American security guarantees before deploying UK troops and warns that a peace deal must deter Russia from any future invasion. And as I mentioned, the UK's Chagos Island is also expected to be high on the agenda. To help walk through this story, Sir Anthony Selden, Downing Street historian and author. Anthony, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Very good. Nice to have you on with us again. So it's always interesting when a Prime Minister meets a president. And, of course, you know, the President of America is bigger than any other president, has more influence. And this particular one, of course, is also known to be a bit of a tricky character. He shoots from the hip. He says what he thinks. And language of usual diplomacy and the patois of the standard kind of political meetups goes out the window. And we don't really know what to expect when it comes to Trump. I mean, in that respect, of all the years you've been covering politics and looking at the history of politicians, have we ever seen anyone quite like Mr. Trump in the Oval Office?
There's never been anyone like President Trump in the Oval Office, particularly somebody so unpredictable and somebody with such a wild agenda, ambitious, that seems to be so outside the realms of what people expect. So, no, now that doesn't mean that Keir Starmer isn't going to do a good job. I think that his lifelong training as a lawyer will actually serve him rather well here, because lawyers are very careful with words. And one thing that you have to be very good at with Donald Trump is to be very careful on words. So, you know, we're going to wait and see. This is the biggest moment of Keir Starmer's political career. Nothing that's happened in his life compares to this meeting. Now, look, for all prime ministers, their first meeting with the president of the United States in the Oval Office at the White House, now that's a very big deal. But at this incredibly balanced moment, difficult moment in history, it matters all the more.
Yeah, absolutely. And some argue, not unreasonably, that, you know, there is something quite refreshing about Donald Trump. He's very clunky, he's very outspoken, he's sometimes quite rude. He certainly doesn't employ, as I mentioned a moment ago, the usual language of diplomacy. He doesn't read from a pre-prepared press release written by an advisor. He just says it how he sees it. I mean, are we in a new era in some respects, Anthony, where, you know, maybe he will get stuff done? Because if Ukraine does become a peaceful country again with no war and it can rebuild itself, clearly Trump's name will be on the tin. And, you know, he did it in a very different way, and he did it rather quickly as well.
So I think absolutely. I mean, look, none of your viewers are going to be saying that Donald Trump is a boring president. No one could ever put the B word up against him. I mean, he's unpredictable. He makes life interesting. I'm a lifelong teacher. This is making politics really stimulating and engaging, if frankly a bit frightening and unpredictable. But, you know, I think there's a real truth in what you're saying. Very few presidents, like very few prime ministers, really make history. They come and go out of Downing Street or out of the White House, and they don't make much of an impression. I mean, we think of Kennedy, we think of Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, and very few prime ministers have made a great historic difference. I think that certainly, I think that President Trump has that absolute ability.
Yeah. Anybody
who rules out there being a lasting peace settlement in the Ukraine, anyone ruling that out now, I think, is out of order, because it is possible. And it is quite possible that he'll do that. It's quite possible that he will bring settlement to other fraught areas in the world. And of course, very much in Keir Starmer's mind is he going to feel so good about Britain and about Keir Starmer that he's not going to levy tariffs on Britain, which would be damaging to the British economy. So all to watch for.
Is there, as far as you could ascertain, Anthony, is there, a behind-the-scenes moment here where someone says to Trump, look, it's the UK, we quite like these guys, your own mum is British, Donald, so therefore, you've got to give these guys something. Starmer's got to come out of this with something, not quite waving a paper, but there's got to be they've got to have that press conference this evening at 7 o'clock where the Prime Minister's got to be able to say something positive has come out of this trip.
Yeah, so that's that puts your finger on it. It is about what you can sell to your domestic audiences. So those images that we had a couple of days ago of President Macron giggling and laughing with President Trump, that will play very well in France for him. And if Keir Starmer gets something that he can come back, and tomorrow's newspapers and press reports will be full of, media reports full of good stories, and that's going to do the world of good for him. And Trump knows that. I mean, he is so politically savvy. He knows what the game is. He knows what Starmer is after. And he will have been, told, look, for goodness sake, President, give the man something.
Yeah.
And there is that residual feeling that he has about Britain. He doesn't have that in the same way about France or Germany or Italy. He does have that family relationship, and also not to be ignored, they speak the same language.
Yeah.
And when George Maloney and the new Chancellor comes in, Merz from Germany and Macron, they're speaking in English, but not in their mother tongue. And it has always helped in the relationship between Britain and the US, that you talk the same language and you have the same common points of reference, the same films, the same sense of shared history and families and relationships.
Yeah, indeed. And it's interesting you mentioned Reagan in that list when you were talking about previous presidents, and it just reminded me of how, whilst Donald Trump employs a very different way of imparting his beliefs, he's being criticised, and I think correctly criticised, for what appears to be a lack of any kind of criticism of President Putin. And yet Reagan was a man who really did, change the face of relationships with that part of the world. Thatcher, of course, became the Iron Lady at that time, for similar reasons. They were able to penetrate the wall, as it were, and do business and shake hands and press the flesh with Russian and Soviet leaders, but still doing so without anybody ever thinking, Reagan, he's his best mate, really. Thatcher loves Gorbachev. It was never that, was it? Where now we're sort of left with this belief that Trump is kind of almost Team Putin.
So, and that's the big difference. I mean, there's similarity with President Reagan in the 1980s was that he's an actor, and Donald Trump is a businessman, but he's also a showman. And so they're similar in that way. They are very good, very adept performers in front of a camera, but the difference is that Ronald Reagan stood up incredibly strongly to the Soviet Union and that nuclear threat from the Soviet Union. He was not going to be making any praiseworthy comments. And it is odd. And it will sit, I think, badly for President Trump in history if there is no deal and he's just left on his record with the praise of Putin. And that will sit oddly for an American president who's throughout history have stood up for liberty and democracy against dictators.
Indeed. Sir Anthony, thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. Sir Anthony Selden, Downing Street historian and author. He knows his way around a backstory of geopolitics, if anyone does. Thank you to him. Yes, Starmer's got to come back with something. There's got to be something in the bag. I don't know whether that's only going to be Ukraine. Chagos is going to be interesting. And what's interesting about the Chagos thing is that Trump might give it the go-ahead rather than saying, no, you can't do that. that will be seen by Starmer as making his life easier. But I think a lot of Brits are thinking, well, why are we paying that amount of money? No one's really explaining these big stories to us that involve several billions and billions of pounds. 0344 499 1000. Mike says, talk is beginning to sound like an echo chamber of anti-Starmer and pro-Trump the Messiah brigade. Going by listeners' comments, I don't particularly like either of them, but what I like less are listeners who show particular joy at hoping that Trump will belittle Starmer. Just remember, Trump isn't our Prime Minister, could not care less about the UK so long as he gets what he wants, to the detriment of anyone he decides to stomp on. I largely agree with much of that, Mike. I don't like either of them, either. And I don't imagine many people would. I mean, I can see, I see what Trump is doing, but I don't think there's anything about the guy's backstory that I would like. You wouldn't want to be married to him. You certainly wouldn't want to work for him. I don't think this is a particularly honest guy. There's something of the Arthur Daly about him. But you know what? Sometimes things work. I acknowledge that things can work. And I do I have to say, having grown up and worked professionally, only in a world of glossy press releases and pre-prepared statements, as I keep saying, from leaders and prime ministers, it is quite refreshing to hear a Trump character who's sort of changed the face of how we do business. Now, that can encroach sometimes into, insensitivity or rudeness, and you can be so blunt that you cease to have any credibility because people just look at you as a bit of a clown. You can go that way. But if Trump plays the game correctly and it's good for his country and the world, I get it. But yeah, I am disturbed by an American president being or lacking what appears to be any criticism of the Russian leader. Although, in fairness, maybe he's just playing a diplomatic game. Thoughts on all of that? 0344 499 1000. What do we need Keir Starmer to get from Donald Trump? I'd like to know the answer to that. I also want your views on these extraordinary immigration figures that we've seen come out today. 108,000 asylum claims last year. This is half under the Tories, half under. 108,000. 1/3 of those applications were people who arrived in small boats across the Channel. That is not sustainable. We've been saying it's not sustainable for years now, but when you see the new numbers come out, you look at the figures and you think these are all people in our country. It doesn't matter where you sit politically, everybody would agree that's not sustainable. What do we do about it? What's the answer to that? 0344 499 1000. And if you've got tens of thousands of people, about 38,000 I think it is, who are holed up in hotels that we're paying millions a day, how do you deal with that situation? I mean, the short answer is, well, you get a coach and say, look, I'm really sorry, we simply cannot accommodate. We don't have the money. We've got starving people. We've got people who got old people with their winter fuel allowance removed. You've got farmers don't know which way to turn for support. You've got a whole raft of things. Life's very expensive. I'm afraid we cannot help you. So we are going to have to, sadly, and we shake your hand and we'll give you a packed lunch. I'm not patronising here. We don't want to beat anybody or jail you just for trying to get in. But I'm afraid you've got to return, because we cannot sustain those kind of numbers. How do we deal with that one? 0344 499 1000.
Let's put the shoe on the other foot just for a second, right? Imagine there was a documentary about life in Israel, and we weren't told that it was voiced by and essentially presented by the son of a Netanyahu minister, right? And we weren't told that. Can you imagine what these people would have said? Ban it, get it off iPlayer, this is ridiculous. This is a huge mistake from the BBC. People like Gary Lineker need to shut up sit down and be quiet because they don't understand what they're talking about.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Joe in Northwood, who says, truly saddened to hear the death of great actor Gene Hackman. He was a legend of the screen, made so many great films, Enemy of the State being one of my favourites of his, was Unforgiven, with legendary Clint Eastwood. Sorry to hear that his wife and dog passed too. I don't know what's, we can all, various theories on this. I don't think anybody would be surprised that a 95-year-old man had died. Whatever the circumstances are, however, his wife and their beloved dog was in that story too. I'm sure we'll get more on it. Let's go to your call. Simon is in Basingstoke. What do you got for us, Simon? Afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. I think Britain and our leaders and Europe as a whole needs to grow up and realise that we live in the real world, not some liberal dream of what the world should be.
Yeah.
I think Niccolo Machiavelli said it best, that, it's very dangerous for a country to rely, or a state to rely on allies, because their interests will not always align with you. And
that's a very Machiavellian thing to say, isn't it?
But it's the truth, and this is always how the world works. It's just we've been able to pretend that it doesn't work that way because America was the dominant world power, and America has just admitted at that Munich Security Conference and by its discussions with Putin that even America doesn't believe that anymore, because it's not true. America is technically bankrupt. So what I want to see is firstly, let's stop talking about the special relationship, which was never true. America bankrupted this country. If American military leaders had had their way, D-Day wouldn't have happened in 1944. It had happened in 1943, been mostly British troops, and they've been slaughtered on the beaches. It was only because Churchill resisted it that we didn't do that. So we need to start being much more grown up. And I think instead of saying we're just going to spend lots of money on defence, we need to do something far more fundamental. We need to say, does it make any difference to us if Putin takes over the Baltic states? I would say no. Does it make any sense if he advances up to the Polish border? I would say no. This country could make itself...
Does it make any difference if he went up to the French border?
Then it would, but then there's lots of things that we could do. We could make ourselves impregnable, give ourselves impregnable missile defences. We don't even grow enough food to feed ourselves in this country. So our priority should be, we need to be able to secure the raw materials and the food and the energy that we need to, if we do need to fight a war. We need to be very grown up. I'm personally going to buy a copy of The Prince for Keir Starmer and have it delivered to number 10, because our politicians need to grow up. I think Trump will be a great president, but he'll be a great president for America, not for Europe. Europe is you can see the panic already. Because we've been riding on the American coattails for far too long.
So you think the world will generally function better if we all act autonomously, basically? Is that the kind of crass headline of what you're saying?
The crass headline is that's what happens anyway, and anyone who believes otherwise is a fool. Think about the Nord Stream pipeline that was blown up. Who's profited from that? Well, America has, because America has been exporting liquid natural gas to Germany. Look at what's happened to the German economy. The German economy is in a state of collapse. I don't see how they recover, whoever's in power, because they no longer have cheap energy to supply their manufacturing base. Well, one of the things that they said when they set up NATO, the purpose of NATO is to keep the Americans in, the Germans down, and the Soviets out. And that's one of the things. An American nightmare is a German industry combined with cheap energy from Russia, because that would be a geopolitical threat to them.
Got it.
So let's grow up.
All right. No, I hear you, Simon. It's an interesting take, and I totally get where you're coming from. No special relationship. Let them do their thing. Let us do ours. We'll do a bit of business and keep it like that. That's Simon. This is Daniel in Epsom. How you doing, Dan?
Ian, how are you, mate?
Good as gold, yeah. Long time no speak.
Yeah, it's been a while. Do you know what I think? I think our dream scenario is Starmer turns up there, and our Nigel's had a word in his mate's ear, Trump, and he said, and Trump says, look, you can have US support in Britain, but you're going to need to control your borders. Okay, like we've started to do in the US. You're going to need to stop the boats, and you're going to need to have mass deportations of the 1.5 million that are there. Trump should say to Starmer, you know, like, the bulk of your population, the majority of Britons, are seeing a decline and a degradation in their society because of it. It's the same in the States, but they're doing something about it. We're doing nothing. We just have the Uniparty, Con-Stroke Lab come in, they talk tough, we're going to smash the gangs, and then they do nothing. So the dream scenario for me is Trump says, look, you can have our support, but you're going to need to tighten your borders. You're going to need to have mass deportations like we have, and we reap the benefits in this country. I really hope that our Nige has been having a little word in his mate's ear.
But I also wonder, is there something else at play here, Daniel? Because how success? It's often said that Obama deported more people than Trump did. Now, I know people argue about that figure. I think there's some reasonable evidence for that. There's always a figure every year that hundreds of thousands, 350,000 get deported anyway, regardless of who it is. So there's been some high-profile stuff in the first couple of weeks with Trump. What if he gets to the end of 4 years and it turns out actually he hasn't deported any more than would go anyway?
No, because I think he's someone who does what he says he's going to do. And that's what's seriously lacking in our country. See, for example, I don't know why we spend any money on illegal migrants in hotels and pocket money and phones and food. Why do we spend any money at all? They should feel like they're not... They should know, these invaders, that the majority of Britons don't want them here. They should be destitute, homeless. They should feel the pain that they're not wanted here. But because you've got our government giving all of our money away against the wishes of the majority, that message isn't getting through. If we gave them nothing and they were destitute on the streets, you know, it would hit home that actually the bulk of the British population don't want us here. We are ruining their society, and I think it's about time that the majority in Britain had our voices heard.
There it is. Great stuff. Daniel, great to talk again. Thank you, Daniel in Epsom. Paul says Sir Anthony Seldon said at least 4 times that Trump is unpredictable. What is he talking about? Trump told the whole world exactly what he was going to do as soon as he got back to the White House. Nothing unpredictable. All exactly as his pre-election manifesto, says Paul in Leeds. Mossy says the Chagos deal is given the green light. This government can shove their taxes as I won't pay a penny more if it's given the green light. Thank you for that, Mossy. Lines are open 0344 499 1000. Let's get the news headlines here on Talk at 2 o'clock.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Lots to get through in this section. We are talking, of course, about Keir Starmer. He's going to warn Donald Trump at a meeting in the White House today that Vladimir Putin will invade Ukraine again unless the US provides protection for a European peacekeeping force. Is that a reasonable position for Keir Starmer? I mean, you can only ask, I guess. I don't think Mr. Trump is going to have any of this. But aside, not just Ukraine. What do we need Keir Starmer to get from Donald Trump? What are your thoughts on that? The lines are open. Also this afternoon, asylum claims in the UK reached a record high of 108,000 last year. A third of those applicants were those that arrived across the channel on a small boat. The gangs were not smashed. Now, this predates Keir Starmer as well, so it's half Tory, half Labour. Is there really any fundamental difference? We'll get a word on that throughout the course of this hour as well, and your thoughts. And police in London have been told to be less aggressive when carrying out stop and search as the Met Police relaunches its policy for seizing weapons and drugs. We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. And by the way, that last story, the stop and search, we will come to it in a bit. I don't understand they've been told to be less aggressive. Have you ever seen any recent, and when I say recent, the last good few years, I know there was a Life on Mars time, when, all right, you young scrote, get up against the wall. I'm going to search you. It was a little bit handsy in that respect. That was a long while ago. Well, you see one now. It's like, hello, my name's PC Smithers. This is my colleague, PC Brown, and we're going to search you. And we're going to search you because we have reason to suspect X, Y, Z, or we're going to establish that you're not carrying a weapon. This is my number. We're being filmed for your protection and for my protection. Are you okay with all of that? I mean, you'd have to be a particularly special brand of stupid to carry out a stop and search aggressively in today's world. You're being filmed from every direction, whether it's your own body cam, whether it's up a lamppost, in a shop, a doorbell, or your Oppo's iPhone. Good luck with trying to carry out a stop and search without anybody seeing. So I don't know where this kind of aggression thing has come from. I don't really believe it exists, to be honest. More on that a little later. Let's get a word on the big stories of the day. Robert Taylor is back with us, the journalist and political commentator. Afternoon to you, Robert.
Hello, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. It's a big day, of course, for geopolitics. Mr. Starmer and Mr. Trump having a bit of a powwow in the Oval Office in just a bit. That will then result in going off, apparently, for a bit of a latte and an iced fancy. And then they'll give a press conference at about 7 o'clock where they'll answer the questions. What do we need to get from the Americans? What does Starmer need to achieve from Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, I think he has to establish some kind of working relationship. British prime ministers and American presidents have often had their big differences, but they've always managed to transcend that and develop some kind of working relationship. But it's really difficult with these two because they're not just chalk and cheese. If you look at it from their favourite foodstuffs, Ian, we've got Donald Trump's Big Mac against Starmer's curried salmon. They couldn't be more different in terms of philosophy, in terms of personality, in terms of political outlet. They're just very different. So first of all, a good working relationship. And then secondly, of course, some sort of agreement over what America is going to do with Ukraine. Yeah. I disagree with your caller just before the break who said it doesn't matter if Russia invades Ukraine. It doesn't matter even if they invade Finland and the Baltic states. I think it matters an awful lot, just as it mattered with Hitler in the 1930s. We have to take Putin very seriously.
Do you think Mr. Trump will show any favouritism to Keir Starmer? I mean, look, we can talk about whether the special relationship is real or just an imagined thing. Does every leader say it to every country they visit, whether it's the French visiting Germany or the Germans visiting Finland? There's always this special relay, this sort of diplomatic language. But we know Trump has got connections to the UK. His mother was British, connections to Liverpool as well. So, and, he likes the royal family and stuff like that. I don't imagine a signed photograph of King Charles is going to cut it. But do you think he might he might read the room and think, you know what, I'm going to do this. And Starmer can walk out of this room waving his paper of victory and say, this is what I got from the president.
Well, you've always got that second state visit, the second Trump state visit to the UK, to dangle in front of Donald Trump and say, how about this? You'd love to come and stay at Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle again, wouldn't you? So I think that's something we can offer him. And there's no doubt, as you say, Trump's, he's got business interests in Scotland. He's got a golf course up there. He's very fond of Britain. Yeah, mother was Scottish. So, and we're out of the EU, though we know this week just how much Donald Trump loathes the EU. He even went as far yesterday, I think, as saying the EU was set up to screw America, which may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but says a lot about what Trump thinks about the EU. We're out of that. There may well be some way in which we can persuade Donald Trump to treat us a little bit differently when it comes, for example, to tariffs.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, isn't it? It's the tariff thing is now up and running, so he's lobbed a load onto the EU. They say they're going to robustly retaliate. There could be a knock-on effect for us, but we're not in that equation, as you rightly say. So, yeah, maybe it could be that. I can't imagine, I think Donald Trump is he's sort of Donald Trump Mark II this time around, isn't he? Not just literally, because it's his second time in the White House, but he's upped his game. And that might not be everybody's idea of, the right way of doing things, but he seems like a changed man from 2016.
Well, he's really hit the ground running. I mean, this blizzard of presidential decrees and decisions, and he's got his eye on Canada and Greenland. I mean, my goodness, you wake up every day and something new and different has happened. Of course, there's a Chagos deal as well, and it may well be, we don't know what's going to happen with Chagos, it may well be that Trump says, look, get rid of Chagos, and that's another favour you can do for us in America. So there are one or two things. I think fundamentally, very different personalities, Starmer and Trump. They're not natural buddies at all, but there could be a meeting of minds and a meeting of interests that allows for some sort of compromise.
Well, we are going to watch with the popcorn a little later as they meet. Connected to Trump, this is Trump's deal that he's carving out with Ukraine. Starmer's there today, of course. Mr. Zelensky is there tomorrow. So it's a busy old day in the Oval. He'll be replacing the carpet by Sunday because it'll be worn out with the amount of presidential shoes and prime ministerial walks that have happened upon it. And this, of course, is all about the deal that Trump has kind of galvanised, apparently, with Ukraine for mineral rights. He's apparently come out with a $500 billion deal. We now own your minerals. Now, a lot of people go, well, is that brilliance on Trump's part? OK, we financed a lot of what's happened there. We've thrown a load of money your way to help you fight this war. We want something back. But a very real belief from some European countries that they've been sidelined and Trump's trousered all the booty.
Well, this is the deal maker, isn't it? This is Trump, the deal maker in action, doing and putting America first. That's what he was elected to do. And he can turn around to his electorate and say, well, look, you may have thought Ukraine had nothing to do with us. I have some sympathy with that, says Donald Trump. But look, we're getting something big in return. We don't have to rely on China for all these valuable minerals any longer. We can get them from Ukraine because we'll have a special agreement with Ukraine. So you can see it from America's point of view. The good thing from Ukraine's point of view, I hope, is that there will be some sort of meaningful, what's called an American backstop, and a meaningful security guarantee. Because I think without America, any security provided by Europe isn't going to be strong enough to dissuade Putin from coming back for more of Ukraine when he's regrouped.
Indeed. Let's move to this story. This is all about the environment, really, Robert. There's a lot going on there. And by the way, I was talking to somebody yesterday who was telling me that wind, despite the Trump kind of line on net zero, which we all get and know what he's doing there, wind turbines and solar panels are a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States. It's the idea that the US is free of all of this stuff is not true. And, there is an argument that Donald Trump, a man who can spot where there's money, in any other world will be the bloke that planted the wind farms.
You would, and apparently he doesn't like the fact, I don't know whether to believe this or not, but he doesn't like the fact that birds are killed from being attracted.
Yeah, there's a couple of speeches saying they do a number on those birds, a big number. Well, apparently they're going to be painted black, wind turbines now, to cut the number of bird deaths.
So I hear, and it seems like a relatively easy win. I mean, these wind turbines are enormous, of course, so no easy matter to start going into the North Sea and painting them all black. That's quite a job, and it's going to cost money. But again, if it pleases Donald Trump, it seems to me to be a relatively painless win. And if we could save a few thousand birds in the process, Ian, well, that's got to be good, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? I mean, you know, nobody wants to colour seagull. Well, I don't know, no, scrap that. Seagulls we don't like. Seagulls are bad. But, you know, eagles and those kind of beautiful birds of prey that we have around. I mean, these are glorious creatures. Death by windmill is not, you know, it's not a great way to go. It's not even a sexy story for the bird fraternity, is it? They can't say, heard about little Alf, the pigeon, you know, got cut up by a flipping windmill. There's nothing great about that. There's no story to tell. In a similar vein, talking of the environment, BP are scaling back on its renewable energy projects by 70%. In fact, they're investing $7.8 billion in more oil and gas production. This isn't the first thing that shocked me about that story, Robert. I didn't know they were. I mean, it's great, but I didn't know they were allowed to do it. I thought there was some rule on that from Ed Miliband.
Well, yes, you may have thought so, but Ed Miliband may be being sidelined. I know we're going to come on to airport expansion in a minute too. Apparently there has been, yes, a 20% rise. That's what this £7.8 billion in oil and gas production is worth, a 20% rise in BP's exploration compared with a 25% cut that was being proposed by the former CEO, a guy called Bernard Looney, which is perhaps...
Mr. Looney, you know, the man who'd never heard of deed poll. Yes, him.
Indeed. So perhaps Looney by name and nature. I don't know. I obviously don't know the guy. But what BP have said is we went too far. We thought that net zero was a good idea. We now realise circumstances have changed. We got blown along by all this net zero stuff, and we need to go back to the basics. We're an oil and gas company. That's what we're there for, and that's what we're going to look for. To me, sounds like common sense.
Yeah, it does sound like common sense. And another one here, Gatwick's airport expansion plans for a second runway face delays until October, awaiting further environmental reviews and responses. I mean, I find this one almost hilarious, bearing in mind that Ed Miliband has gone, no, you know, we have to change our life. You stop eating meat, travel less, fly less, stick a heat pump in your 18th floor flat, God knows what else. But at the same time going, yeah, but I'm all right with a new runway. I mean, that seems extraordinary. You'd think he would have resigned, but he won't resign because he likes a limo and a red box and all the power that goes with it. But it is interesting that it's likely to, you know, to happen, but there's still some environmental considerations, which is likely, Robert, to end up with somebody promising to plant some trees in Bromley or something.
Yeah, so there are problems with noise pollution. Well, you and I know a bit about that because we're on the flight path.
Yeah.
Certainly I am in Tunbridge Wells on the flight path to Gatwick. So there are concerns about that. But the main thing here is Labour getting real. It's only just over a year, or about a year, since Labour abandoned its green investment plan worth £28 billion. It realised that was just unaffordable. Now it gets into power. It's expanding Heathrow. It's looking into the third runway. It's looking into expanding Luton Airport. It's looking at now Gatwick as well. This is the Labour Party realising in government all those sort of student politics green credentials that they were burnishing a year or so ago. No, we have to get real. Otherwise, the economy is going to be going downhill very quickly.
Indeed. And again, that's Donald Trump's position on so much, isn't it? Look, you know, whatever the considerations are of, going forward, we've also got to deal with the now as well. And the now we need to do this, this and this. And we're not going to take any daft lectures from fringe groups. And I sense this country, Robert, has listened to a lot of fringe groups on a lot of issues over the years. These are people that punch well above their weight. They're often people with the loudest voices. We see this with the sort of trans discussions as well, DEI and all of that. Loud voices do often work. And I think that's why we've ended up in this kind of Alice in Wonderland world.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that. Those on the sort of woke progressive side of politics, if you look at certain figures, they're about 15% of the population. But judging by their voices, you'd think they were more like 65%. And yes, it's time for the rest of us to assert what we really believe as well. And it's great to see this Labour government. I don't support generally, but this Labour government this week beginning to do one or two good things.
And a final one here, Mike Ainsbury. He's the former Labour MP. He was jailed for 10 weeks this week for thumping a constituent. This is a violent man, clearly, an out-of-control man. Can't keep his fists to himself. Not a nice piece of work. But he's appealed the prison sentence. It's now been suspended. So he's not, well, I think therefore he's gone to jail for, 2 or 3 days. And he's now back out again because they've suspended the sentence after an appeal, which I'm frankly staggered about, because you can go to jail for a long time for writing the wrong thing on Twitter. But if you punch somebody's living daylights out of them, you get 10 weeks to start with, which I thought was ridiculous. And then you appeal and get nothing.
Yeah, it's the two-tier standards here, isn't it? And it's less about this 10-week sentence. OK, I think I can agree with you, should have been more. But what really matters here is people going to prison for 2 years for an offensive tweet. That's the one that's out of all proportion. The Mike Ainsbury one, well, 10 weeks in prison is going to be pretty nasty for him, I can tell you. So I don't mind so much about that. The tweet one, I very much do mind about.
There it is. Thank you very much, Robert Taylor, as ever. That's Robert Taylor, political commentator. One in from Claire here, who says, I was gobsmacked with your response to my message yesterday. I don't know what message. Is that the one about wanting Starmer to be eaten alive by Trump or something like that? I'm paraphrasing. Apologies, Claire, but you know what I mean. Seems you thought I was not being fair to our Prime Minister, wanting to see him outflanked by Trump. Well, if we have a Prime Minister who only looks after his own as his people and bins the rest and vilifies them, who freezes out pensioners, who freezes out farmers, who freezes out businesses, who hits our pockets, who lies about everything, pledges everything, who gives away strategic rights to defend our country, who ignores the electorate, does nothing about mass immigration, fears, who supports this loony net zero policy and killing our freedom of speech. Do I want to support our green and pleasant land? No, because it's not green and not pleasant. You could be talking about any Prime Minister, though, from Boris Johnson through to Rishi Sunak. Throw in a bit of Theresa May, maybe David Cameron, certainly Blair. Could be any of them, really, who would support. You could throw the same accusations at any of them for differing reasons, I suppose. You wouldn't have the same list. But there is a thing in politics, you see it on social media, called list theory. If you want a list of 10 reasons why Keir Starmer is great, I saw somebody do this the other day and it was so disingenuous, it was laughable. But you can compile a list on anything. I don't disagree with Claire's list, by the way, and when she puts it like that, fair dues. I do still retain the position that I want my leader, whoever they happen to be, when they meet another leader, particularly of a bigger economy and a more influential economy, I want him to come out with the booty. I want him to come out with the goods. Will he? Well, wait and see. Got a few hours to go. We'll find out. 0344 499 1000.
They decided to pull it. And now Gary Lineker says it's a great piece of journalism. You shouldn't have done that. Well, Gary, first of all, you wouldn't know a great piece of journalism if you fell over it. And second of all, it is the most ridiculous and most irritating judgment I think you've ever made about anything. The people who made the documentary are associated with Hamas. One of the people in the documentary appears in every piece of Hamas propaganda. Sometimes he's a doctor, sometimes he's a driver, sometimes he's a photographer, sometimes he's a journalist, sometimes he's an injured person.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one comes from Mark, who says, love the show. Seriously, I've lost all faith in any and all UK institutions, especially after hearing Mike Amesbury getting a suspended sentence. You see, here's the thing with that. When they dished out some pretty robust sentences for people who'd written some, unpleasant things on social media, the case surrounding that was kind of there were people who wrote some such horrific things, and incitement and, all the rest of it, that you can see why you might get a sentence for that. But the context, and I say this not to defend, because I think jailing people in that respect is a waste of prison time. We'll all agree on that, surely, when push comes. It's a waste of prison time. But it does reflect what they did in 2011 after the London riots, when they were jailing people for... Social media wasn't the thing then, but, the student that nicked some... was he 18 or 23 or something? I can't remember the guy's name now, who stole some bottles of water from a shop and got 18 months in jail. Because they were jailed under the kind of umbrella of a riot public order situation, as distinct from any other day of the week. You'd never have been jailed any other day of the week for any of those tweets. But the world went mad on it, and I get it, I understand it, but that's the thinking behind it, OK? So in a similar vein, I would say that Mike Amesbury not only committed a horrendous violent act against a man in the street, knocking him to the ground, that's bad enough. But these are the... OK, riots, exceptional circumstances. Exceptional circumstances here is that he's an elected MP. I think that is the game changer. I think you should be treated differently. I think you should be held to a higher standard. So whatever the maximum sentence you could have given somebody for that kind of assault, and it was pretty brutal. I think he went back in for another punch, didn't he, even when the guy was on the ground or something like that. Maybe he'll sue me for that. I'm happy to have that one played out in the High Court, frankly. Regardless, it was violent, it was horrible. The fact that he was an MP is the exceptional circumstance in this case. Held to a higher level, an elected official, the constituency member of His Majesty's Parliament, carried out a barbaric act of violence in the street. I'd have given him 3 years for that, frankly, any day of the week. 0344 499 1000. Now, Keir Starmer preparing to meet Donald Trump, of course, at the White House. He's going to press for those guarantees on Ukraine. Will he get them? The Prime Minister will hold private talks with the President before a joint press conference. They're expected also to discuss Chagos. Oh, yes. Let's speak to Harry Cole, political editor at The Sun, who's in Washington to see firsthand what is going on there. Harry, good afternoon to you. We know Mr. Starmer, kicked it all off with a bit of a meet and greet over there at the ambassador's residence. A few wines were had and the vol-au-vents were passed around, and Peter Mandelson got a gentle, humorous kicking. But the real work starts in a few hours.
That's right. Keir Starmer's here. He landed last night, as you said, hit the diplomatic circuit pretty hard, laying on the charm, meeting a few of Trump's sort of White House officials and cabinet ministers and politicians who are all at that bash. He got there pretty late, but there was quite a good reception for him, I thought. Lots of Americans turned out. The sort of special relationship the government are keen to stress is strong. But look, the stakes could not be higher for this afternoon's meeting. Keir Starmer's currently holed up in briefings, preparing for his, what could be a make or break conversation for him. The US president is notoriously temperamental. That said, when he does seem to take a shine to someone, he can be incredibly charming. So it's a fine balance that the Prime Minister's got to take. Number 10 people around Keir Starmer saying, look, he does have a good relationship with him, which means he can actually give him the hard truths, tell him things where they disagree without it descending into an almighty Barney. Now, we'll see if that genuinely happens. There are a lot of flashpoints that could come up in the next few hours. Anything really, from obviously the differencing positions on Ukraine. Obviously, Starmer got his punches in early with that defence spending uplift earlier this week. Some people say too little too late. Other people say, it'd be a no-brainer not to walk into that meeting today without saying, yeah, look, I hear you. We are listening to your calls that Europe needs to spend more money on defence. But there's some quite knotty issues about the Ukrainian peace deal, how it would be policed. Would it be British troops? Starmer's going to say, look, it has to be a credible deterrent or Putin will just come again. So it needs American might behind it to obviously the Chagos issue, though government here, Brits here are desperately trying to play down that the Americans actually care that much about Chagos. We'll see whether that's true or not later today. Then there's lots of other things, slightly broader about the tariffs. Donald Trump threatening again yesterday 25% tariffs on the EU. Will Brexit Britain be able to escape that at a time when Keir Starmer is trying to pivot back towards the EU, take us more closely aligned to Brussels once again? Will that have an effect on it? Then there's a row going on between Apple and the British government, US tech firms and the British government. These are big sort of jewels in the American economy's crown. So Donald Trump will want to protect those. So lots of places they could fall out yet. So we're on tenterhooks.
Oh, I guess the bit that they don't want to happen is Donald Trump just going rogue and saying, Keir, there's a lot of weird things going on in your country right now. You're jailing people for tweets. You've got all this, happening in terms of DEI, and, you've got uncontrolled immigration issues. Because you can kind of imagine, Harry, Trump doing that.
You could, and if you look at his Vice President, J.D. Vance, who did just that at the Munich Security Conference a couple of weeks ago, where he said, look, Europe is in retreat on free speech, on migration, and all those issues. These are clearly, these were talking points in the US campaign. These are issues that the president is acutely aware of. Obviously, we've got now the extraordinary situation we're seeing this morning where the right-wing influencer Andrew Tate, who's been held up on charges in Romania, currently on a jet heading for the United States. It's been reported that was with the help of the United States government to get him out there. Now, Andrew Tate is wanted on rape charges and human trafficking charges in the United Kingdom. We have an extradition treaty with the United States. Will Keir Starmer ask for Tate to be sent to Britain to face charges? That could be a big flashpoint. Or, as you say, will the president voice his concerns, perhaps, about some of the things he's talked about two-tier justice in the United Kingdom, censorship, lack of freedom of speech. So, yeah, that's definitely another flashpoint, and one I think that would be at the higher end of the sort of disaster scale of number 10 planning for this, if it does end up into being a sort of more of the things that sort of Elon Musk has been tweeting about for the last few months, grooming gangs and that sort of like. There are lots of very knotty issues that could come up that Starmer will be desperately trying to avoid.
And in terms of the chronology or the choreography of how this all pans out over the later this afternoon, UK time. So they meet in the Oval Office. They have one of those like weird kind of Macron-esque sort of handshake things where you intertwine your hands. Is that right?
Well, I don't think Keir Starmer is quite as touchy-feely as President Macron, and the sort of officials here have been slightly guiding that he won't be doing a sort of similarly dramatic overture towards Donald Trump. He'll do it in his own way. He said, look, they're playing up the fact that they do have a good relationship already. So allegedly, they've met a couple of times. So yeah, they'll have a one-on-one. I think they're actually going to have a genuinely one mano a mano conversation for a brief amount of time. Then obviously various officials will join them for the tete-a-tete, as they call it. And then then we'll see them in the Oval Office. We'll get the chance to throw some questions at them. The Americans call it rather affectionately a spray, which is a uniquely Americanism, I think, of basically a load of journalists shouting as many questions as possible in a short amount of time. Now, when I've done these things with Joe Biden before, Boris Johnson and the like, Rishi Sunak, and the Biden administration kept Joe Biden, for obvious reasons, as we remember, on an incredibly tight leash, whereas Donald Trump's been a bit more willing to, he's already answered 1,000 questions since he's been president, since January the 20th, which is more than I think Joe Biden answered in 4 years. So there's lots of opportunities for us to get our points across and hear what they have to say. And then they'll go away and have lunch together, a couple of hours of sort of meetings talking about Ukraine and the like, and then we will see them for a formal press conference, which again, traditionally these diplomatic things can be quite staid, one or two questions from either side, whereas Donald Trump's been more willing to free flow. So if we don't come back with a story from this, then I'll be very surprised.
Yeah, indeed. Me too. Harry, enjoy it. Thank you. The always diligent Harry Cole. He's political editor over there at The Sun. If anyone's going to sniff this out and find the story and get the right question in there, it is Harry Cole. That conference will be live here on Talk a little later. We understand there's a couple of things going to happen. There is the Oval Office meet bit, you know, where they shake their hands and have a polite chat. Then, as Harry said, they go off for a cheese sandwich and an iced fancy. And then the big press conference. That's around about 7 o'clock this evening. So probably during Kevin's show, you will hear and be able to see that live this evening, the press conference between Starmer and Trump right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you in a few moments' time. Just gone 2:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 3. Now, asylum claims have jumped to their highest since records began in 2001, with 108,000 people applying last year. Migrants arriving after crossing the Channel in small boats accounted for a third of that total. New Home Office data also shows a sharp drop in the number of visas given to foreign workers, down 37% to just over 200,000 in 2024. Let's get a word with Meekna Quibus, researcher at the Migrant Observatory. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Nice to have you with us again. I mean, these are big numbers. Were they expected? Is this, is there anything in the kind of spreadsheet that says, well, it was always going to look, higher for a bit before new initiatives kick in? What is the story here? Because the numbers, to many, politically at least, will look rather devastating to a government.
Right. So I think it's important to contextualize these numbers. As you were saying, I agree with you. These are not completely unexpected, even though we've seen record levels of asylum applications last year. Numbers have been very, very close to that record high for a number of years now. In fact, we've seen an increase of 18% year over year. So it's pretty much more of the same in a sense. And all of these different pressures that have been building up for a number of years have simply been continuing in 2024.
So what do we take from this? And I know your work at the Migration Observatory is not to politicise these things, but just out of interest, when you look at numbers, do we have to settle on the fact that we now live in a world where these will be the kind of consistent numbers on an annual basis? It will pretty much, unless some almost Trump-like initiative happens politically, we can expect numbers like this for the foreseeable future.
Yes. So I think the real big thing here is that there's not really any kind of policy lever that's available for governments to really do something about the asylum applications. In particular, as you were saying, small boat numbers that have been publicized much more. That's only a third of all asylum applications. The vast majority of people who end up making an asylum application do end up coming into the country on a legal visa and then make an asylum application once here. And there's very little to do in terms of policy, and there's very few options to address this. Although we have seen other changes across the asylum system, including in the proportion of people that are given protection. So we've seen a big drop there in the proportion of people that receive asylum out of all of these applicants to now below 50%. For the first time in a number of years now.
So below 50% for those who are successful in claiming. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, so last year of all the initial decisions that we've had, less than half were positive decisions, and that's been a big drop. So 2 years ago in 2022, the grant rate was around 76%.
Yeah, I remember
It's been going down. It's been going down for a couple of years, and we've seen that trend continuing last year.
Is there any correlation that I noticed the number of visas given to foreign workers has also dropped, and there's definitely a political angle to that because previous governments, and this predates Mr. Starmer, previous governments have, in their attempt to try and be seen to solve a problem, decided to be a little more careful, if that's the right word, on who they gave visas to. But I mean, some people will argue whether that was the right way to deal with this or a wrong way. Is there any correlation between visa numbers going down and asylum claims going up?
Very little correlation. So it is possible that since you have these large numbers of people coming into the country legally, it's possible that if the share of people who apply for asylum stays the same, it's plausible that simply by having more people here, we'll have more people who end up applying for asylum. But these tend to be two different issues. And as you know, the government has made different pledges with regards to bringing down both of these numbers, both legal migration and work migration in particular, as well as small boats and unauthorized migration.
OK, Migna, good to have you on with us again. Thank you, sir. Migna Quibus, researcher at the Migrant Observatory. Let's speak to Mike Jones, political commentator, migration expert. Mike, afternoon to you. What do you make of these numbers? I mean, the numbers are huge. Our previous guest there making the case that, this is kind of the direction of travel right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good news there. The number of work, study and family visas has actually gone down. But as you so brilliantly pointed out, this is downstream of James Cleverly's reforms. So, Mr. Cleverly, he banned dependents joining social care workers. He banned dependents joining most postgraduate students. Obviously, PhDs are immune from that. So, I mean, this is entirely predictable. It was baked into the cake. The Labour Party can't claim any credit for this, although they may try. In terms of those applying for asylum, we have record-breaking numbers. It's about 108,000. Records were first kept, I believe, in 2021. The high point previously was 2002, I believe, where you had around 102,000 asylum applicants. So this is an all-time high. And what that tells me is that illegal immigrants who have been in the country for quite some time see a window of opportunity to apply for asylum because the Labour Party are in power. There's no Rwanda plan anymore. The Human Rights Act is still in situ. You still have, the whole human rights, legal, industrial complex. And Labour is trying to fast track these applications through. Yeah. So people who have overstayed their visas, people who have come here through other clandestine means, this is their window of opportunity. And you're going to see those numbers increase year after year.
What was interesting from what the previous guest was saying, is apparently the green light is being given in fewer cases than before. It was these were his numbers. 76% roughly got the right to, certainly on their first attempt, to say, yep, you can stay. It's now down to below 50%. That doesn't fully answer the question, because you don't go to an office and be told, no, you haven't passed the asylum test. There's a boat or there's a plane. You could be here for years after that, of course, with various appeals. Well, what do you make of his claim there that we are giving the OK to fewer migrants than we ever did?
Well, statistically, yes, the acceptance rate has gone down. It's now slightly below 50%. But even if you reject an asylum claim, you've still got to get rid of them. You've got to deport them.
Yeah.
And many of those who have had their claims rejected remain in the country. They abscond. In some cases, they make further legal appeals. I mean, if somebody is from a country that's deemed safe by the human rights authorities, say Vietnam, then deporting these people is a lot more straightforward. But, you know, if you're from Afghanistan or Syria or Iraq, even if you've had your asylum application rejected, actually getting rid of you is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, what the Labour Party are doing, they're fast-tracking the applications through. Some people will be accepted. They'll be given settled status. Some people will be rejected. But the aim is not to solve the problem, which is a deportations problem. Labour's aim is to get the numbers of people in hotels down so that they can claim a statistical victory to the British public. So they're not actually trying to solve the illegal migration crisis. They're trying to shift the costs from hotels to the welfare state and local authorities. That's what they're trying to do.
Absolutely, and those in the hotels, I think, were just shy of 40,000 or something. It's costing millions a day. Whether they're successful or unsuccessful makes no odds, does it? Because they will still be here in this country, but they will be moved from perhaps a different status, but it will still cost millions and millions of pounds a day.
Precisely. It's like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah.
You know, hotels are hideously expensive, like really expensive. And if you can shuffle people around, I'm sure there will be some cost savings there. But at the end of the day, they're still here. The most fundamental question in asylum policy or legal migration policy is if people have come here illegally across the channel, through the tunnel, if they've overstayed their visa, can you actually deport them? That's the most cost-effective, the most democratic way of dealing with the issue. It's good for the economy, it's good for social cohesion, it's good for parliamentary sovereignty. That problem hasn't been solved because we have the Human Rights Act, which embeds the European Convention of Human Rights into British law. And, you know, ultimately, you have the Home Office acting like a Potemkin institution where it doesn't really have much power. It just, you know, shuffles deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yeah.
The real power lies with the courts and the human rights lawyers. And that problem has not been addressed by Labour, and it will not be addressed by them.
Well, you're actually wrong on that last point, Mike, because I've got some breaking news for you. Keir Starmer's going to smash the gangs. Hooray! So, you know, problem will be... I can't do it without laughing. The problem will be solved, apparently. I mean, I've never heard him or Yvette Cooper really make any comment. You know, in the same way that you hear Sadiq Khan talk about ULEZ cameras, but not kids getting knifed to death. I hear him talk about smashing the gangs, but never actually about the cold face of the problem, which is thousands of people, often on a weekly basis, crossing the channel. No comment at all.
Yeah, I mean, smashing the gangs is a complete fool's errand.
Yeah.
It's not getting to the root cause of the problem. You know, ultimately, the people smugglers, it's a transnational operation.
Yeah.
It's very discreet. They're small groups of people. They're very amorphous. And you need, you know, international cooperation and extraterritorial powers that don't exist. And, you know, it's like trying to play whack-a-mole. If you know, arrest one kingpin or shut down one factory of boat parts or, you know, confiscate boat parts elsewhere, something else will pop up. And they're very, very adaptable.
Yeah.
And it's just not going to solve the problem. Ultimately, you have to punish the people smugglers' clients. You have to make it economically irrational for them to attempt the journey across the channel. Because, you know, if they arrive here in Dover, they're detained, they're deported within, you know, 48 hours or so. You know, the money they've paid, the risks they've taken with their lives, you know, that's a sunk cost.
Yeah, of course.
And the clientele for those people smugglers will dry up. It's a completely topsy-turvy way of tackling it.
It's a really bizarre one. There's no one on planet Earth that would advise a government to tackle it in the way they are, if tackle is even the right word to begin with. Listen, Mike, it's always great to speak on these things. Thank you, Mike Jones. He is a political commentator. This is his field, his area. He knows it well. He's absolutely quite right on that last point about... I mean, what the heck are our government playing at? At what point would you say, you know, this is ridiculous? A third of those 108,000 that have arrived here in the last year came via the channel. That still leaves two-thirds that came via other routes. Everything needs to be explored, and it's a lengthy process, and it costs a fortune. 40,000 people stuffed in hotels. Man alive. I mean, you want we're asking the question, what do we need Keir Starmer to get from Donald Trump? I'd like Donald Trump at the end of the press conference to go, oh, by the way, Keir, just as a final point, you might want to deal with that immigration thing, and you ain't going to do it by just wheeling out that same tired old mantra that means nothing. It's just vacuous guff. Smash the gangs. Smash the what? Smash the pangs, mate. Means nothing at all. Sort it out. Will he say that? Well, we'll watch and see. I mean, it's possible that he would say that. It's Donald Trump, after all. 0344 499 1000. Now, we're going to go back to your calls and comments in a couple of moments. Lots to get through. Time, though, before all of that to find out how you could be in with a chance of winning £25,000.
Time's running out to get involved in our 25 grand competition. Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to win this life-changing amount of money for 2025. So what do you need to do to get involved? All you have to do is text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post. It's as simple as that, but time is running out. Once again, to get involved, just text the word prize to 83338, or you can enter by post.
18 plus, UK excluding NI. Enter by SMS for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on March the 3rd, 2025. Or send your name, email and contact number to £25,000 cash competition, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP, to arrive by 5 p.m. on March the 6th, 2025. This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
It feels like there's something else going on, and it's not genuinely about entertainment, and it's not genuinely about like an appropriate storyline, if it is all over our soaps, which I suspect it is. And then when it's sort of in somewhere like CBeebies, you just think, well, this is an agenda, and what is your agenda? Is it sort of sexualization? Is it to totally undermine women? Whatever it is, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever on a CBeebies website.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 10 to 3. Right, before we go any further, don't go away, David, with you in a second. It's the voice of Doom, day one. Brand new voice, brand new mystery voice. Starts today, for those uninitiated, to the process of the voice of Doom. This is usually a political voice or somebody connected to the world of politics. So it differs in that respect from pale imitations you might hear elsewhere. Voice of Doom, brand new voice. Here it is.
I've decided to give you a present.
Who is that?
I've decided to give you a present.
Don't phone in. He's trigger happy old Dave today on the buttons. Don't phone in. There is no prize. But you can message in if you want to. 87222. Here's the voice again.
I've decided to give you a present.
Come on, you know that voice. Who is it? Who is that? If we get a right answer, we will reveal all after the news at 3 o'clock. If we don't, it rolls over to tomorrow. Here it is again.
I've decided to give you a present.
87222 if you think you know. David is in Exeter on the big meeting over there at the Oval Office. David, how are you doing?
I'm very good.
Good.
So Trump has said yesterday, his first cabinet meeting, the EU was built to screw the US over.
That's what he said, yeah.
That's what he said. So that being so, I think just want to put this into context for everyone.
Yep.
So we've got the new German leader, Friedrich Merz, is saying about we can't rely on the US and we've got to do our own defense and security and
Correct.
sort of this kind of narrative of the US administration, Trump pulling away from NATO and leaving the European nations and the EU high and dry. That's not really what's going on with this, because really what's happening, it's the US that's continued to invest in their defense and security, and it's the European nations that have underinvested. That's the context. Now, so before Starmer went to see Trump, he made a bit of a twitch that we were going to increase defence investment. The quantities you're talking about are nowhere near enough or timely enough in 2 years' time. They're not time appropriate. It'd be 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks would be appropriate. 2 years is not.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a bigger issue than the amount, to be honest.
Correct. Well, the amount is potentially smoke and mirrors, but this is the but. So where's the capital procurement going to go in order to get our military in a condition where it's ready to fight? So what we're seeing coming out of the EU from Macron, Ursula von der Leyen, head of the EU, ex-German defence minister, they're talking about European Defence and Security Union with common EU-managed procurement, single point defence procurement. She wants one single European defence contractor. So all the systems and platforms will be common for any nation jumping in and out of them or working on them. So where's Starmer going to spend this money on capital procurement? Where will the money flow? Will it flow to BAE Babcock into Britain, or will it flow to the US, or will it flow to the EU? That's my question. I can tell you where that's the correct question. Where's Starmer going to spend this money? And I'm going to make a bet with you, Ian.
Go on.
Where's he going to spend the money? He's got a problem because he has to keep America, the transatlantic alliance and NATO maintained. However, this is the however. Tony Blair has said that the European Defence Union is absolutely essential, and he wants we being the EU when he speaks, to have its own defence capabilities. So I suspect strongly what's going to happen here with the 2.0 Starmer-Blair government is they're going to spend and flow the money into EU Defence Union with their common procurement. And that's why America is reacting. This is why the Trump administration is reacting as it is now. This isn't America pulling away. This is Europe pulling away from America.
That's a very good point. I suppose Starmer could say, I tell you what, Donald, we'll just give it to you and you can spend it.
Well, I mean, I've just discussed this with numerous admirals and generals and chiefs of defence staff over the years. And what as successive governments over 30, 40 years have annihilated our military's capability of fighting independently or intervening, along with that, they have taken out the industrial capability where we could do things quickly and cheaply. Now, in wartime, the most important thing is that you can do stuff quickly and cheaply. The quick bit is the important part. So if you were to say, right, BAE, I want you to make that, and that, we need that now, how long would it take them to do it? Well, the default position would be, well, we'd buy American off the shelf. Well, it's not as simple as that anymore because the EU want to do that. So the same question, how long will it take the EU to make defence systems and platforms?
Yeah, good point.
It's going to take them years. Now, all the while we've got this timescale, back to the timescale problem, who does that give? Who has the advantage there with all that time? The adversaries, not us.
Yeah.
So if we want peace, okay, well, that's going to come at a price ultimately, because if the talks don't work, the next thing is, well, there'll have to be a pushback, won't there? A physical pushback.
Yeah, and based on what you've said as well, David, completely reasonably, Trump is not in a million years going to go for this.
No, I think Trump has done the look, and I think Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, the defence secretary there, have articulated this actually quite succinctly over the last couple of weeks. We need Europe to step up.
Yeah.
We need the nations to step up. You need to be ready to fight. This is all absolutely real-time, reality check language. And I'm convinced what we've got here, as they said, and I'm in agreement, it's the rich European nations that have underinvested.
Yeah.
And I sat in Defence Committee with General Sir Richard Barrons, Admiral George Zambalis and Air Chief Marshal Baz North in 2018, and they told Defence Committee in Parliament the tone and the relationship with our adversaries had altered. It had been altering over 10 years, and that was then.
Yeah.
And the government was not listening, they were not investing, they were not stepping up, and we were in a very different world with our adversaries.
And also, it's worth throwing in, David, Donald Trump raised this in 2016 as well.
He did.
he read Europe the Riot Act. Really, look, reality check, guys. Stop feeding all this money into your adversaries because it's me that's picking up the security bill. It's not right, you know. And he took a lot of flack and misinformation and disinformation.
Sure.
But of course, even back then, that was a critical period when we thought we were leaving the EU. Actually, what was happening was there was acceleration under that Brexit referendum period for the EU subsequent to our vote.
Correct.
To accelerate, because they didn't want to in the vote. They didn't want the British people to know that they were establishing this European.
A lot of deals were done, weren't they, in all sorts of areas before the whole Brexit thing was ever given the full seal of approval. Listen, I've got to run, David. No other reason I want to get another voice in before the news. You've been brilliant, David in Exeter. Thank you for that. Ben's in Essex. We've not got ages, Ben, but I know you can do it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Ian, I just think it's quite embarrassing being a British citizen that our Prime Minister is going to meet the world leaders, particularly the American president, and we're ashamed. I think that is a real sad thing. You know, why haven't we got a leader where we can be proud? I mean, I understand that politicians and prime ministers can be a bit edgy or a little bit where we haven't got to like them, but the fact that we can't stand this guy and he's weak is a poor reflection on us.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite sad, really. You know, it reflects his policies, what he stands for, his values. You know, we want a strong country that represents us in a strong way. And the fact that we've got this wet lettuce going over there, and it's like walking to school with your mum.
You don't reckon he can turn on the shine with his kind of legal brain?
No, I don't think he will. I tell you, I think Trump would just. I don't know if you remember Ali G. Do you remember when Ali G interviewed Trump and he sees straight through him straight away?
Yeah.
I kind of get that impression, really. Yeah. And I just hope he reads in the right act and his influence can have some influence over what he's trying to do out there to our country. And it's quite sad, really, that we have to think that, but it's just the way it is, Ian, and I hope it gets better.
I'll tell you what, get your popcorn ready for this evening, Ben, because this could be... I mean, it might, you know, we might all go, oh, it's a bit boring. Nothing happens. But, I mean, this could be the mother of all press conferences between two leaders. We'll watch with interest. Ben, thank you. Ben in Essex. One here comes in from Steve in East Yorkshire. Starmer is clearly working towards Britain joining a European Defence Force. David just mentioned that as well. But given the EU countries can't agree on anything, and its Common Defence Procurement Fund will be a complete disaster, says Steve. And I sense you're right about that. Starmer is torn down the middle. After the news, will we have a winner on the Voice of Doom? Here's the voice again.
I've decided to give you a present.
Who is that? Don't phone in. There ain't no prize, kids. You can, however, message in if you want to. 87222. We'll tell you if we have a winner after the news headlines at 3 o'clock right here on Talk, which are coming next.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. 0344 499 1000. Lots to get through this afternoon. Prime Minister Keir Starmer will warn Donald Trump at a meeting at the White House today that Vladimir Putin will invade Ukraine again unless the US provides some kind of protection for European peacekeeping. Police in London have been told to be less aggressive when carrying out stop and search as the Met Police relaunches its policy for seizing weapons and drugs. We'll speak to Harry Tanguy on this point in just a couple of moments. And Gary Lineker, who else would you expect? It's old Gary Lineker, isn't it? Slamming the BBC for dropping its controversial Gaza documentary, joining 500 other TV figures in accusing the broadcaster of bowing to censorship and racism. These are people that don't understand the very basic mechanics of journalism and impartiality. Man alive. And they're putting their name to this publicly? No wonder he's walking the plank. 0344 499 1000. Mark in West Sussex says, looks like a precedent has just been set. Precedent, I should say, has just been set. If I was to punch an MP to the ground, I could expect a suspended sentence. I doubt it somehow. Yeah, it's a very good point. Reference the MP who was jailed on Monday, only for 10 weeks, by the way. He's now had it converted to a suspended sentence. Staggering stuff. Right. OK, are you ready for this? The voice of doom. Did we get a right answer? This was the voice we've been playing you.
I've decided to give you a present.
So it's just day one, all right? Is it going to go over to day 2, then 3, then 4? Let me give you some of the answers that have been coming in on this one. Jacob Rees-Mogg, no. Jeremy Hunt was another guess. It was not. Sir Graham Brady, Bill Clinton, please. No. John Major, Norman Lamont, no. Interesting one, Paul Eddington from Yes Prime Minister. I like that kind of thinking outside the box sort of go, but it's not. Peter Hitchens, no. We have got a right answer. Oh, on day 1, it's gone like that. Jez in Bow was the first through with a right answer. He wins a mouldy mince pie and a bag of gravel for guessing that Jonathan Aitken, of course, former, was he Defence Minister? He was certainly Chief Secretary of the Treasury. I think went to jail, of course, famously. He was shunned by Thatcher, I think, because did he go out with Thatcher's daughter for a bit, Carol, and then ditched the relationship? But he did go to prison and then became a vicar after all of that. Jonathan Aitken was the right answer. Well done to Jez in Bow, who was first through identifying it correctly. It means it comes back, of course, tomorrow with a new voice. Stand by for that. So here's a story that starts off down in the capital, but of course these stories are contagious. London police are being urged to tone down their approach to stop and search under a new Met Charter. The guidance, shaped with input from officers and young people, follows criticism over aggressive tactics and misconduct cases. Despite this, the Met defends the practice, crediting it with removing 17,500 weapons in 4 years, 3,500 of those in 2024 alone. In a moment, we'll speak with Ken Hines, chair of Haringey's Independent Stop and Search Monitoring Group, regularly helps us out on these kind of stories. Harry Tanguy, former police sergeant, is with us to start with. Harry, good afternoon to you. On that point, to begin with, less aggressive stop and search. I remember seeing the videos of the Life on Mars days when people were a bit handsy and, cops had a very different brief when dealing with kids on the street. But the last time I looked, we appear to have the most polite police force in the world when it comes to, hello, I'm PC Smithers, I'm from Bethnal Green Police Station, I'm going to stop and search you, are you OK with that? We seem to have quite a protocol in place. Stop and search aggressive, is that a reasonable way to define it?
Oh, how the wheel turns, because frontline police officers are backed off because they realise they're being criticised, they're being suspended from duty, they're often being charged for offences, of course. And I think where so-called community leaders, often self-imposed, we need to be very careful who we're listening to. Yes, we don't want overzealous police officers out there. But what we do want is our politicians and our superintendents and above to go out with the front line, not on a 2 o'clock in the afternoon talking about the problems of neighbourhood policing, which we see on our television, but actually going out at 2 or 3 in the morning, carrying out stop searches. And you'll realise the great majority will be people of previous convictions who are quite dangerous or dealing drugs. And guess what? They don't want to be stop searched. So what are they going to do? They're going to make full advantage of anything they've got towards them. And that means film, be aggressive, be obstructive, blame it on their colour, their youth, their sex, or whatever it may be. But they will know, and those police officers will know they're filmed, every step is being watched.
Yeah.
They're coming to the point where they're saying, look, if you don't want us to stop people, we won't, because it's not fun. It's dirty, it's dangerous. It's confrontational, which is something I could do without every day of my working life.
Yeah.
Why don't I just back off, do the bare necessity, and then perhaps I'll get through my 30 years without being sacked or suspended or going to prison.
And
That's the problem we've got.
an edited video from an onlooker's camera could have me suspended for about 3 years by the time the IPC have kicked in. So not worth my trouble.
It wouldn't be so bad if there was a few bosses with some backbone, but even those bosses with backbone would be absolutely cascaded by politicians who are there for 5 minutes. They want to appear to be doing the right thing. No, London in particular is in a hell of a state at the moment. I've just had a friend of mine who's had his car completely robbed of everything within it on a nice little afternoon in what looked like quite a good suburb. And I said, what the hell were you doing leaving your stuff in your car, even out of sight? You can't do that nowadays. And I think it needs robust, firm policing where it doesn't always look pretty. Policing doesn't look pretty when somebody is confrontational or resistant, because immediately you put hands on and someone swings back, what are you doing? Don't touch me. The onlooker, who is not experienced in this sort of thing, will think, well, why's the police officer stopped him? He didn't have anything on him.
Yeah.
And when a police stop a group of 6 people because they've sent to this group because one's got a knife, of course, the statistics hate that. 1 success in 6 people, knife recovered. Everyone else would say that was a really good result. Knife off the street, someone nicked, someone has perhaps stopped being stabbed. No, statistics say that's a terrible 1 in 6 hit rate. It's terrible. We need to have a bit of realism now. Robust, firm policing, fair policing. But as long as we're pandering around saying less aggressive, we're going to be back where we started. We're not going to get any further.
Ken Hines, let's bring Ken in, chair of Haringey's Independent Stop and Search Monitoring Group. I mean, just respond, if you would, Ken, to Harry's point there that, there's a lot of fluff around this idea that, we've got to be less aggressive. I mean, most officers that you would speak to today say, well, we're never aggressive in the first place. We can be robust, though, and in certain situations you have to be.
I don't know what rose-tinted glasses he's looking through, but on the ground, I've been on the ground for the last 30 years, and I haven't seen much change. What he's describing there may be a minority, even so, an insignificant minority that might affect. But the figures I look at each month shows quite clearly that that 9 out of 10 stops and search lead to no arrest or no further action. And my thing is simply this: that interaction could lead to that youngster being stopped and scarred, emotionally scarred at the very least. And all too often, when we see it goes rogue, and they're using excessive force, throwing people to the ground, putting them in handcuffs, and then expecting to have a dialogue, it just doesn't happen. The police need, as one of the 10 principles, to police by consent of that community. Don't rubbish what those young people are telling you, that they need to be kinder in their interaction, because, as I said, they haven't got a very good hit rate. Let's talk about the weapons. Less than 3% of their stop and search are for weapon, and less than 1% may lead to them finding a weapon.
Ken, 3,500. Ken,
that gets more knives off our street than what the police are doing.
3,500 weapons, Ken, are not on the street as a result of stop and search last year. That's good.
But how many stop and search? 500,000? About 500,000 stops and search to get 3,500 knives off? What that equate to less than one a week per borough. That's what it equates to. And to me, that's not a good return. If I was a CEO with those kind of bad returns, I would be sacked.
Harry,
I'd expect to be sacked.
Harry, it's not that the numbers don't stack up. It's disproportionate.
Yeah, the CEO would be sacked, but we're not talking profit here. We're talking lives. Look, there's no dispute here. I'm not arguing with him where this gentleman. So I forgive me his name.
Ken.
Ken. Sorry.
Ken meet Harry.
I'm not
Harry
arguing
meet
with
Ken.
Each stop search should be polite. It should be official. It should be so that. And I would often think if I didn't get a thank you, and you're not like the others. You're great. That's what I used to get all the time. But that's what my colleagues used to get all the time. So we're not arguing with that. It should be fair. It should be good. But 1 in 10 hit rate is bloody good when you're talking about weapons, unless you don't want proactive policing either. And when members of the public send police to a group of lads to say, I've seen a knife, they've got a knife and they're genuine, they've backed up, they've given their name and whatever, then what do you think those police should do? Well, there's more than 10. The stats are going to look terrible. So what is confusing as well? Yes, police by consent, but consent of who? The person who doesn't want to be stop searched because they've got a criminal record as long as they're armed, or the community who I listen to through counsellors who say they'd love more stop search in their policing community. And this is what I'm saying. Who is actually choosing these community leaders, or the other community just too frightened to say, no, we want more community? And people have got to learn as well. If there is resistance for police officers, then they should expect a firm hand. And that is what is called excessive force in some fields. That's not excessive force, because guess what? When you have to put hands on, that is minimum force. And you can't just say, well, he didn't have anything on him, so what was the point? Well, hindsight's a wonderful thing as well. If you speak politely to a police officer, you'll get spoken politely back again. And we need a little bit more of that respect back to the police, and things will run a lot smoother.
Ken.
Listen, let me say this much to you. We talk about the ripple effect. So one person's bad experience becomes everybody else that he touches and goes with that. What that then adds to, instead of police using good resources from the community to add to their intel, there's lose a whole stripe of people who no longer have no faith in the police and see them as an occupying force. My thing is simply this. When they start taking the law into their own hand and start killing one another, what are we going to say? You're going to say, oh, look at these fairy-tales. We need more stops and search. Wrong. You need to deal with people's emotional well-being, their triggers. If you are going to trigger them, they're going to look at you as the ops and will not support anything positive in our community. I feel the backlash. I'm on the front line. I have to deal with the fallout. But you sitting in your ivory tower and talking about your theory, it's not working on the ground. I would ask you to come on the ground with me for one night only, and have a conversation with some of the young people who's affected by stop and search.
Ken, I can't speak for Harry, and he'll come back in a moment. I'm pretty sure he's been on the ground many times in these sort of areas. Let me ask you this. Let me ask. Okay.
And have a dialogue.
Let me ask you this though, Ken. If you Firstly, stop and search, why would that have to be game-changing in terms of your views of the cops if it was done politely? And, you know, I mentioned at the beginning, anyone can YouTube a video of, you know, how polite the situation is. The police officer announces who they are, which station they are from. They explain what's going to happen. They're filmed from every which way you can imagine, whether it's up a lamppost, on a doorbell, from your mate's iPhone, or the body cam. So there's that. But secondly, and so in two parts of this question to you, Ken. Secondly, if there's 10 kids, 15, 16, 17 years old, and they're at 3 o'clock in the morning and they're out, and you are suspecting that one of them might be carrying a knife, you might have to search all 10, right? You may have to, though that would be your 1 in 10. Well, 1 in 10, that's not very good. You're not going to search one and go, well, he's the one with the knife, it's not any of the others. You're going to check everybody, aren't you?
No, that's not stop and search. You need to have, if you're using reasonable ground, you use what the law sits there. You've got to have reasonable suspicion that you're going to find.
It's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're 15 and there's 10 of you on a street corner. That's reasonable grounds, isn't it?
You still have to weigh things up. And it's, as I said, it's called go wisely. You let them know what their rights are. I often look at the police body-worn videos, and we rate the police body-worn videos that we see, live videos, we rate them on a traffic light system to saying, red for something that we think we're seriously concerned with, orange because they've got learning to do with that, and green because it's been done professionally. We also got another one called Green Plus, when they've done something exceptional on their stop and search. So that's looking at it from a community perspective and the law to saying what is the best result. Okay. That way we will get better results and better interaction. At the Hendon Police Academy.
Okay.
I train these youngsters, these young police officers, and have interactions with them, right? And hear what they're saying and help shape their mind to get better outcomes on the interaction they're going to have with young people on my community, in my community.
All right, Harry, so the overarching point that Ken is making is that there's clearly a diplomatic issue in the way that these are dealt with, and, you know, what we thought was life on Mars territory from 30 years ago is kind of still going on. It's leaving young kids scarred.
Yeah, and Ken mentioned the ripple effect, and the ripple effect I received as a police officer was that everyone's getting beaten up in the cells. It was my friend was beaten up in the cell. Were you beaten up? No, I was never beaten. Okay. So, and that's all I ever heard. So be careful, be very cautious of the ripple effect. I'm not naive enough to say, Ken, that this never happened, okay? I'm not saying. I'll also concede in the fact that there's a real danger now that experienced police officer, I was on the front line in city, countries and villages, but cities such, you know, and it was pretty hairy, and I was on the front line for 30 years. I was never in an office. I was answering 999 calls the whole time. But so I've sort of got a fair idea of, I must have done thousands of stop searches. So my concern is, with all the experience going, you're having a much lesser experience, especially in London, when people are just hacked off, police officers are. And therefore, you don't have that experience behind saying, right, this is how, I mean, I've got tactics to keep things down. So if someone raises at me, I would say, you know, if I'd say, please don't confuse my politeness as weakness. If you continue like this, I will stick you on your backside. Now, shall we start again? So giving that, now, shall we start? So I've imposed authority. I'm confident, but I'm giving a chance of an olive branch here. Shall we start again? And that would work a lot. And it's things like that which can be taught, but is learned through experience as well. Because otherwise you're ending in a fight because someone's larging up saying, what are you going to do about it, copper? Which is what's happened. And a lot of cops don't know how to deal with that. And because they're young and inexperienced, it's not their fault. And I think we're holding them up to fail, basically. And so, yeah, I'll concede with that, Ken. That's the problem we're going to get. And I think it's going to get worse, especially if those same officers feel that anything they do is going to be jumped on, and even can be looked at you, Ken, and your colleagues who aren't in the front line wearing a uniform dealing with it. Some would describe as, I'm not saying you personally, but and some people would describe as the 95 jury looking at it, and they don't have the atmosphere, they don't have the information coming in from the reporting person, because they'll be complaining if nothing's done about it, about these views. But yes, there is Go Wisely, and you can't just stop search random people. There has to be something else there. And police officers are very well aware of this, because they know it's the first thing that will get them kicked off the force.
And just a final word, Ken, is there such a thing as good stop and search? Can it be used effectively?
Of course it can be used effectively. It's all about the dialogue. And I would say, I won't talk about as police officers putting anybody in their backside. I would put it on the aggressor to say, why are you bringing that negative energy into this space? It's
because
not that
it's going to end in tears if you didn't get control of it.
I would turn it around and put it on them. I'm here in service of my community. What are you doing? So I would turn how you get the best out of people. It takes two to go. It takes two to go to war. It takes two to go to war. One to make the peace.
No, they won't listen to you if you do that.
I'm a security.
My experience says
I'm
that.
on the door. I'm at Arsenal. I deal with thousands every other week.
Ken, you just be your whole demeanour now is you would rile someone who you disagree with, and they would get angry with you.
You had your space.
You're not a calming effect.
You had your space to make. So please do me the honour to let me there sum up, because we haven't got long here.
All right, 20 seconds, Ken, if you could, sir.
If you want to have a conversation off screen, that's fine. But I'm saying simply this: that we're not getting the right sort of police officer at the front. If people are too scared to be using themselves in a leadership role, that's not the front line is not the role for them or for you to experiment. I see this at the front. I see them when I'm interacting with some of these new recruits. Some of them are no older than sixth formers and look that way, and they haven't got the confidence, but yet we put them in the front line in dangerous situation. They are dangerous. They can be a danger to themselves, they can be a danger to their colleagues, and most importantly, they're a danger to the community who they're having that interaction with.
All right.
I have them.
Go on, Harry, very quickly.
But we're lucky to have those inexperienced young police officers. If it wasn't for them, we'd have nobody else. And we've got to be careful of the next generation of cops because we're severely letting it down. We think things aren't going to get worse. They are, because they're totally disillusioned.
All right.
How they're being treated in the job.
Harry, thank you. Harry Tanguy, former police sergeant, very robust, and equally as robust, with a very different view, Ken Hines, chair of Haringey's Independent Stop and Search Monitoring Group. You heard both of those opinions. Thoughts on that? 0344 499 1000. We'll take some calls and comments on there too. 23 minutes after 3, this is Talk.
He will back reform this local elections, but reform shouldn't count on his support beyond that.
It'll be interesting if Dominic Cummings starts to sidle up, because he's a very divisive figure, and it'll be interesting to see how Nigel responds to that. When people were criticising him over Tommy Robinson, I actually thought to myself, well, that actually shows leadership, because I crave in this country leaders who actually do not get deflected simply because somebody criticises them or accuses them of something, or says, oh, you've upset this group of wannabe whatevers, activists.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
One from Chris, who says Starmer and co are going to have to tell all of those people on benefits that the party's over. The country's in mortal danger economically and militarily. We can't afford to keep you in clover anymore. You are all going to have to go to work for the benefit of the country. If you don't, you're helping Putin, says Chris. There's one way of looking at it, I guess. So thank you, Chris. This one from Michelle. The USA didn't extradite Harry Dunn's killers when she was actually guilty. Trump isn't going to extradite the Tate brothers. No, it's the other way. Well, they did. Yeah, sorry, they didn't. We wanted them here. We wanted Harry Dunn's killers here. There was a slightly different reasoning behind it. Trump isn't going to extradite the Tate brothers. No, I don't know whether there'll be an application for that, though. I think that's the difference, isn't it? Harry Dunn's killer, who was the wife of a diplomat, I think I'm right in saying, they did eventually come to some kind of agreement. That was a pretty grisly time. We spoke to the family of Harry Dunn quite a lot at that during that period, or the post period. But yeah, the Tate brothers, I don't. What would happen there? If it's a great question from Michelle. If you suddenly put in an application to say we want them back over into the UK, I mean, these are pretty grisly, horrible characters. You've only got to look at. You haven't. But again, there's a sort of fan base that just like they're just lads, aren't they? You know, it's just like, your daughter dating one, really? This one comes in from Ian. I wonder if questioned by Trump on the state of the UK, if Starmer will have the nerve to reply, I've only been in charge for 8 months. He might end up having to do that. he might be left with nowhere else to go other than to play the old "it was the Tories what did it" card. Graham in Kent says, what happens if the US does a deal on minerals with Ukraine and then in the not too distant future Russia invades Ukraine and stops supply of the minerals? Will the US step in then? It's a very good point, actually. How do you stop Putin invading again? America won't be there to help. Can the Americans offer some kind of... I mean, the idea that it's not... Trump says, well, it's Europe's problem. I think that's pushing it a bit. I mean, there is a global contingent to the world, even if you're not a globalist. You have to acknowledge that if Russia, the nuke-laden nation that is the enormity of Russia, biggest country in the world, I mean, if they start kicking off anywhere, I think that's like most Western countries' business, is it not? To a degree, to different degrees, perhaps. Poland would have a bigger, outside of the Ukraine, Poland would have clearly a bigger concern maybe than New Zealand would have. I get that. But in terms of political inclusion and diplomacy and reaction, I would have thought that America would want to be at the table on that one. Robert's in Hertfordshire. How are you doing, Robert?
Hi, Ian. Just before I start, I watched two films last week.
Yep.
One was Elizabeth, the Golden Age.
Okay.
And the other, I know it was a great film, two Australian actors, I know that. But and then I watched The King, okay, you know, about the Battle of Agincourt. What has happened to this great country? What has happened to, I'll tell you what, there's no way that we can, in any time of conflict, we can have anybody from the Labour Party. No way. No, and this is what we've become. Now all of a sudden now, we're running around bumping into furniture. Why didn't we keep our budget up since the end of the war and kept it up? You know, now what we've got to do now is tough love. Now we've got to be really right-wing. I'm not talking about them. How could we stop the enemy from coming across our shores? We can't even stop the migrants.
Yeah. We are left in a really precarious situation if the budget is under par. I mean, Trump's position seems to be, and I might be wrong on this, Robert, but it seems to be, look, Putin's not going to go to war. That seems to be, he's not going to do this. So relax, get over yourselves and stop panicking.
Well, they're bankrupt, aren't they, America? I mean, but what he's done, he's changed the law straight away. I mean, within a couple of days of him getting into office, all he was doing was signing papers. Yeah. I mean, we haven't got the gonads to do that. And I don't trust the Labour government in times of conflict. And, when you think about it, we got into the Second World War over liberating Poland. We liberated France. We liberated half of Europe. We should be leading Europe. Or the other way to do it is, right, let them get on with it. We're an island now. Let them all get on with it. Yeah. Why are we giving foreign aid to countries like Pakistan who've got a nuclear capacity? Why are we doing that?
There's a whole load of questions on that. But, I mean, you could go much... If you really wanted to do a kind of Elon Musk and start going around and looking at where money is really spent and how it has been... I mean, what Trump is doing, he's mixing up the order of events, isn't he? Every country has kind of sung from this common hymn sheet for years on things like foreign aid, and it's clearly important, even vital in some areas. I get that, but in quite a lot of areas it isn't, and certainly not at the amounts that are being talked about. When we mention, that we give, I don't know, X amount of hundreds of millions of pounds to one country, you've got to remember every other country also gives the same millions to that country. You think, where the hell does it go then? You've been getting this every year for decades? What do you do with this stuff? It's those kind of questions that I think Trump is probably the only leader who's prepared to kind of question that, right?
Well, he's a businessman. I know he had a bit of an help up from his dad. He wasn't a very good businessman at the beginning. I mean, if it wasn't for his dad, he wouldn't be where he was now.
Yeah, that's probably true. But that's he's not unusual in that sense. But of course, America also aren't cancelling their foreign aid. They still have a foreign aid budget, right? I mean, it's far bigger than ours.
Yeah, you're right. But I think what we've got to turn around to be more right wing, and I don't mean anything to do with the migrants. We've got to turn around to people and go, right, go back to work, you. You've been, since the lockdown, you've been. Look, there's no more of that now. You either go back to work, or you're getting a sack. We've got to get rid of all the radical lawyers, all the radical judges, and it's time for this. And we've got to be right wing. I don't mean right wing in domestic ways. I mean right wing towards the rest of the world.
Well, that's the card that Trump is clearly playing at the moment, isn't it? Robert, thank you very much indeed for that. The bit that I'm genuinely enjoying this. So I'm somebody who's not, I think probably in common with quite a lot of people, not a natural. I mean, he's not my leader. He's not. I have a view on Trump, and as a person, it's not a particularly favourable view. And I'd like to think most sane people would have a similar view to that. It's the one I also have of nearly every politician, by the way. I mean, Trump has got some exceptional elements and tacits to his existence and his being, and certainly his CV. But the thing I'm really enjoying is the changing tone of debate. And there's no way around this, that we sat here at the tail end of last year with a dirty old war going on in Ukraine, and 3 weeks later, Trump sworn into office, and that dirty old war could be about to end. So whatever you talk about how much money you're putting into defence and minerals going here and not there, and it should be this, and he said nice things about Putin and he shouldn't have said nice things. Whatever way you slice all of this, and I know there's some really weird stuff going on, you know, folk doing Nazi salutes. I'm not talking about Elon Musk, by the way. I don't believe he did one. But really weird stuff going on. But if the war in Ukraine is solved, then where do you go with that then? If you absolutely loathe Donald Trump to the point that you wouldn't recognise him doing something right, even if he gave you £1 million and bought you the best dinner in every restaurant in the world, you still would. You'd have to surely still acknowledge, wow, you know, look, it stopped. There was a war, now there's not a war. It didn't start under Donald Trump, but it's finished under Donald Trump, and within about 5 minutes of being in office. You'd have to give him full house points, wouldn't you, for that? There's no way around that, unless there's a catch in this that I'm not seeing. 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. Just gone 3:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 4. Now, Gary Lineker has blasted the BBC for pulling its controversial Gaza documentary, accusing it of bowing to censorship and racism. The outgoing Match of the Day host joined 500 TV figures, including Miriam Margolyes, Anita Rani and others, in signing a letter defending the film as vital journalism. It was removed, of course, after a backlash over featuring a Hamas minister's son. In a moment, David Elstein joins us, former BBC executive producer and chair of Open Democracy. First, Roger Bolton, former BBC presenter, a bit of a legend in the world of broadcasting, I'm bound to say. Roger, good afternoon. Nice to have you with us. Are you one of those that did or would sign such a letter?
I'm one of these people who would have marched the day before on an anti-Semitism march outside Broadcasting House, and I would have marched and signed the letter with other 500 people on the Palestinian issue. Because I think what's going on here is there's a propaganda war going on. It's understandable, but we should recognise it for what it is. And the fundamental problem that lies behind this issue, or one of them, is the fact the Israeli government will not allow independent journalists into Gaza. Why not? That's a big question. I mean, they're very happy to show the appalling atrocities that Hamas committed and take you to the site and so on. They are blocking independent journalists operating from Gaza. In that situation, how are journalists outside to report? That's the difficulty. I think there's a real issue, there appears to be a real mistake by the BBC in terms of not pointing out that the young child being used to voice a lot of this was related to a Hamas official, and that should have been made clear. But I think if we're saying, because of that, the film should not be shown. Because of that, we shouldn't see the buildings. Because of that, we shouldn't see the suffering that's going on. I think that's a very big question.
Is there a wider body in evidence? I mean, you say relative. I mean, son of and you say Hamas official. Some would say a terrorist. So depending on which part of the telescope you look through, that's not an insignificant point. It's kind of vital journalistically. It's really important that will be pointed out to the viewer. You know this as a journalist. But there were other examples as well of other people within the film. Some of the crew also who made their comments known about what they thought about October 7th and other areas as well, Roger. There's a body of evidence that this might have been a little bit iffy from the start.
I don't think so, Ian. This is the fundamental problem. If you can't get your own teams in there, if you can't get your own journalists in there, you can't get your reporters in there, you can't get your own cameramen in there, what are you going to do? You are stuck. You have to use the people who are available, the cameramen who are available there. Now, what you should do is point all that out to the audience, make it very clear, and I think this is where the BBC made a mistake. But the alternative, Ian, is that we don't have any reporting from inside Gaza. Now, look, I mean, I don't know whether you accept the figures or not, but most people accept the figures that roughly 50,000 people have been killed in the Gaza conflict, of which roughly 48,000 are Palestinian. Even if you halved that, you'd see that 90% of the casualties are Palestinian. And a lot of accounts say that 70% of the people who've been killed, certainly in buildings and so on, are women and children. Now, are we to report that or are we not to report that? If we only reported that and didn't report the atrocity that Hamas had committed, the BBC would be culpable. I think they made a daft mistake in not attributing this, but I think that, from what I can see, the documentary should be shown and made available.
So are you saying then that even if the journalism isn't great and the people that are taking part in it, be they front of camera or behind, are somehow compromised or affiliated, or certainly have been very vocal in their affiliation with Hamas, etc., it's still worth making it, even if it's made on fairly rocky foundations to begin with?
I wouldn't say the foundations are rocky, but I think you've got to do it. But you should know, and this is where the mistakes are made, if you are going to operate in those circumstances, you have to be very open and honest with the audience about the circumstances, explain it to them, and certainly in their relation to the child and so on, make clear who they are. But those buildings didn't just fall down without bombs being dropped on them. These people just didn't fall down in the street. They were killed. We have to report that. But we also have to make sure that we make it clear that Hamas commits terrorist acts as well. The people who, but they recognize the larger thing. There's been ridiculous things going on in the press, not least in the Daily Telegraph and so on. And people like Danny Cohn, who used to work at the BBC, talking about sickening and shameful. BBC bias is not just inept, it's become sinister. We had Melanie Phillips a year or so ago talking about the Hamas Broadcasting Corporation. I don't blame any Jew for being deeply concerned about the future of Israel and desperate that it survives. But what is now going on is a propaganda war from both sides, and we shouldn't get sucked into it.
I can get that it's hard to get in there, but news is for years has been difficult to cover in many regions of the world. There's many award-winning journalists out there. Some still work at the BBC who've penetrated areas and made contacts with all part of the job of an international journalist, and particularly in a war zone, they've managed to get through. You're saying we've got to take what we can because this is the only way we can do it, by using the son of a terrorist.
What we've got to do is report. The BBC has to report, and it's got to provide the facts as far as it can.
But if it's fronted by the son of a terrorist, then that's not a good look.
Fronted by. He was 11-year-old. He should have been identified. But this was a real child who was in the middle of suffering. And what we saw, and we see too little of this, partly because Israel will not allow independent journalists in there, is tremendous suffering. Now, this doesn't justify Hamas remotely, but it's something that should be reported. And if you're not allowed in the country, in the past, when I was an editor 1,000 years ago, we sometimes had to lie in order to get into, for example, South Africa, apartheid South Africa. But it's a very big thing to go in and use subterfuge to report. Sometimes it's necessary.
Yeah.
But it's far better. But if the choice is no coverage at all, then that's what you do. In this case, they didn't do any of that, but they dangerously did not identify this child. They should make clear always, when you go to a communist country, when for example, the BBC's excellent Moscow correspondent reports, of course, he should always be making clear the constraints in which he operates. But it's worth it because he's reporting on the spot from what's happening. And if he wasn't there, we wouldn't know. So there are always compromises. If you work for any totalitarian regime, there isn't a totalitarian regime in Gaza, but there is a very nasty group of people controlling most of the life in Gaza. So what do? Do you go in secretly, or do you try and operate openly? What you must do, whatever you do, is A, report as best you can, and B, tell people the circumstances in which you're reporting.
OK. On that point, Roger, thank you. Roger Bolton, former BBC presenter, editor, journalist. David Elstein, former BBC executive producer, chair of Open Democracy, is also with us. Afternoon to you, David. I would guess, firstly, don't want to put words in your mouth, but certainly the last point that Roger was making, fair enough. You know, journalists have a job to do, and they try to, you know, sometimes have to tell a porcupine in order to get into a certain place. That is called journalism. Look how many people have risked their lives reporting even on Russia, even in recent years as well. So we all get that. What about this particular documentary, though, the one that has really caused a little bit of a row here, to the point that 500 TV figures, including the great Gary Lineker, is very, very upset about it? What do you make of it?
Well, I think the people who signed that letter are being unduly naive or worse. Look, Roger's quite right. There is a propaganda war that's going on here, and the BBC fell into a trap. It's the reason why no outside journalists were allowed in by Israel is it's so overwhelmingly dangerous. I mean, dozens of journalists have been killed in the Gaza fighting. As it is, you can't expect a responsible government to say, oh, well, come in, take your life into your hands. It's not a realistic thing to expect of the Israelis. So, as Roger says, you are dependent on what comes out of Gaza. But it's equally unrealistic to imagine that anything like this documentary could be made without the permission and agreement and complicity of Hamas. Whether the children, as it turns out, were related to Hamas operatives, Hamas ministers, etc., is almost irrelevant. And I think the BBC, when it withdrew the film the first time and put up the first of the facts that should have been disclosed right from the outset about the father of one of the children, it also said we had complete editorial control at all times. Well, that's patently untrue. They had nobody in Gaza in their employ, neither the production company nor the BBC. They're entirely dependent on what the children loaded up on their phones and sent to the BBC. Of course, thereafter, they're editing it, but you don't have any editorial control over input, only over output.
Yeah.
And I think in this case, I'm really surprised that BBC executives were so trusting and uninquisitive as not to ask all the basic questions. Who are these children?
100%.
Where did you find them?
Yeah.
Do their parents know that they're participating? Who are their parents? Is any money being paid? What control do you have over any of the process that's going on? Now, once you've disclosed all of those things and put out all the health warnings, absolutely transmit the movie.
Yeah.
You know, you could transmit it on YouTube today and nobody would have any complaint. The problem for the BBC is that it has editorial rules and processes, but didn't follow them, or at least appears not to have followed them, which is why there's an inquiry going on. So, unfortunately, we lose the value of the testimony such as it was. It's impressively put together, and it was a good idea to find children to do it, but we missed the benefit of that for a whole series of editorial failures at the BBC.
Indeed.
And I really regret that.
Look, I've been in newsrooms all my working life, including at the BBC. You, David, a little longer. You know this terrain very well. It seems extraordinary. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. You know, it's certainly if you've got a kid fronting a documentary, if for no other reason, you've got a duty of care, right? To say, hang on, who's the parents of this child? Who you know, did they give permission? So that in itself, you'd think would have come up as almost the first question. You know, as it turns out, the kid who's fronting it is actually very good, you know, very erudite, quite fluent, confident kid. That in itself, you say, wow, who is this child? He seems to do this rather well.
Ian, are you surprised? This is a propaganda exercise. It's an entirely legitimate one, but it's propaganda. The casting has been done primarily by the invisible controllers inside Gaza, much less so by the production company. So all credit to whoever put the package together, putting it together, and it was revelatory, and it did tell you important information. But without the necessary health warnings accompanying it, you undermine its value.
Of course you do.
A bit of an own goal.
Indeed. Spot on. David, great to have you on, sir. We will speak again, I hope. Thank you, David Elstein, former BBC executive producer, big respected name in the world of broadcasting, and chair of Open Democracy. The voice you heard before that was Roger Bolton, former BBC presenter and journalist as well. And I think that's right. I mean, the last point I think that David made, you know, this is great access as long as you front up and fess up who you're talking to. The fact that some of the other kids also had connections to Hamas and the kind of secret police or whatever you call them. The fact that a cameraman and others had posted their jubilation and their endorsement of October the 7th. You've got to put all that in there and say, right, we're going to make a documentary now. It's fronted by this kid. His old man is part of a terrorist organisation. One of the other kids in it, his dad's a bent copper. And by the way, the bloke that filmed it thinks that October the 7th was fine. You can do all of that. I'd say it's still great access that we've got because you don't get to see these images very often. So, there's that going on. Might even win a BAFTA. But just so you know, before we start, these are the cast of characters that we have for you, and then you can go and watch it and make your own mind up. The idea that we didn't know that is you don't have to. I mean, Gary Lineker, I mean, get in the bin, mate. Do you not get that? There's no one on the planet that could not understand that point. I was surprised. Roger Bolton, who's a very respected man, I used to watch the bloke on TV when I was a kid. So Roger Bolton, he's been around the block journalistically longer than most, didn't quite grasp that in the same way that I thought he might. Just forget your allegiances, forget what you believe politically, forget who you think's right or wrong. This is a question about journalism and integrity of the state-funded broadcaster, and they failed at every single level. 0344 499 1000, 10 to 4, this is Talk.
legitimate concerns that the protesters, I won't call them rioters, the protesters were expressing. They were expressing fear, they were expressing anger, they were expressing rage. That's a potent combination. But in lots of ways, they were correct, and they knew that this was terror related. And it's this kind of manipulation. It's all about manipulation, and that's what we have. We have manipulation from the police service, we have manipulation from the institutions, we have manipulation from the chattering classes who drive culture. And I think we're sick of it.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Matt in Derby. He says, our two brilliant contributors, you gave both the space to speak. I do think, this is our last piece we did, I do think the notion of Israel blocking access to Gaza purely for the safety of the reporters is nonsense and should be challenged. If so many journalists are dying in Gaza, doesn't that demonstrate how devastating the attacks have been? Great show. Matt in Derby, thank you very much indeed for that, Matt. Let's go to Simon in Cambridge. Reference stop and search. Afternoon to you, Simon.
Hi, Ian. Thanks for taking the call.
Pleasure. What are your thoughts?
Well, do you know what? I think I was just shouting at the radio earlier. I think it should be more simple. If a report's given in of a description of a person, and then that's what the police should be looking for. I'm 50, slightly balding, often wear a three-piece suit. And if somebody's seen carrying a knife of that description, I'm more than happy to be stopped and searched. My son, bless him, he's 21. He looks like a cross between Rodney Trotter and Billy Idol. And if that description was given out...
That's quite a look, by the way.
Bless him. He pulls it off.
Has he got the white hair?
He has got the white hair.
Good for him. Good for him.
It bothers me.
Of course it does, It would bother me. When my kid gets to 21, it will bother me. But I quite like the idea that other people's kids express themselves in the way they want to.
Yes, I'm not so happy.
Yeah, I know. I get it.
But if that description was given out and he came home and he was disgruntled by it, I'd be quite happy with the police searching him. If that was the description, that is the description.
100%.
So that's really my thoughts on it.
Yeah. Do you think we've kind of almost talked ourselves into this idea, or some communities and some groups have talked themselves into this idea that just by being stopped and searched is brutality?
I don't like the fact that I've even got to be careful on this.
Yeah.
But it is... And it is really as simple as that for me. If a description is given out, then that's what the police should be searching. And when you were talking about a group of 10 people, if the description is relatively vague, I think you said about 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
Then all 10 should be searched.
You'd think so. I mean, you're not going to search one, are you? You're not going to search one,
No.
And if you found something on one, you're definitely going to search the other 9. But that would allow for statisticians to go, oh, they only have 1 in 10 success rate.
And that's the problem with the stats, isn't it?
100%. 100%. It's it's all a bit iffy. Great call, Simon. Thank you very much indeed for that. Duncan says the people of the United Kingdom do need a degree of punishment for voting socialist. Let Trump kick Sir Keir around a bit, says Duncan in Bath. I think he might do that. Steve says he's not my Prime Minister. I hope Trump humiliates him and comes back looking like a right old chump. We'll watch with interest. 7 o'clock tonight, thereabouts. There will be the prelude to the press conference bit, where they both stand at the podium taking questions. There's the bit where they're in the Oval Office having an initial chat. This is where they had this curious moment with Macron the other day. Did you see it, with the arms and the knuckles and the weird handshakes and pressing the flesh and all these arm-based gymnastics? which was just a bit weird, frankly. I don't think they're going to have that. I reckon they probably rehearsed not to have that. Let's not do the weird handshake stuff, Donald. So possibly we're okay in that respect. This one in from Adam says, I think Starmer will get a huge shock. Trump will demand the Chagos deal gets cancelled, which will free up 9 billion quid of our forces. I hope Trump clearly explains what a woman is and tells Starmer that his 2.5% increase in defence is a bad joke, that we need to spend 3 to 5% minimum. Then I hope that Trump sets conditions that we just cancel DEI initiatives within government and schools and tell him how ridiculous carbon capture is. That'll free up another 20 billion for defence. Trump will tell him to drill, baby, drill. If Starmer doesn't play ball, he won't get a trade deal. I mean, there's a good balance there. Thank you, Adam, for that. Wouldn't you pay to see that wheeled out at that moment? You got to do it, Keir. You got to do it. It's going to be big. Oh, it's so big. You got to do it. Drill. That would be something else. But then, of course, what you don't want is to... You don't want other leaders telling other countries what to do, Peter Cardwell, do you?
You know what one of those other countries might be? China.
China. That's right. He likes that. China.
He likes China.
Yeah. I'd forgotten about China.
Well, big day.
Big day.
Very big day. Keir Starmer in Washington. We're going to be hearing live from the White House throughout the programme, throughout Drive, and from Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun, who is on his way into the White House at the moment. He's going through security as we speak. He'll be with us, hopefully, if he gets through security, in about 20 minutes' time. But there are loads of questions. What a force looks like, what a backstop looks like, this word backstop, what does that actually look like, the minerals deal, also what Keir Starmer can realistically expect to get out of this meeting, because Donald Trump may well just say, lovely to see you, Keir, actually, as you were.
So they have the little powwow in the Oval Office, the shaking hands, and everything's good.
Kind of a lunch as well,
Then they go for a bit of food, and then they come back with the press conference.